Here we go. NBA Strategy Show, Wednesday, August 19th. The NBA Strategy Show brought to you by SuperDraft. I'll tell you a little bit more about them in a bit. Yesterday's slate, not a great time for me. My co-host, Greg Ehrenberg. Greg, was the slate any better for you?
You know what's funny is I didn't do terribly in DFS. I didn't do great either. I was like a 5% ROI. I got crushed in some of the live bets though, because I live bet the Bucks at halftime. I was so confident they were going to come back into that game. We were talking before, at one point they'd cut the lead to 70-69 in the second half. And on the live line, the Bucks at that point were like minus 1,300 or something like that. And I considered hedging with the Magic point spread at that point in time. I was like, it doesn't matter. The Bucks have this in the bag. The game's over. And then they totally came unraveled and fell apart. So that was what really got to me yesterday. That and some of my best lineups. I had some really good lineups where everybody had value, and then just like Victor Oladipo was in the lineup.
Yeah, that one didn't go well for Oladipo or his face. It did go well for the Awesemo.com inner circle. 1-800-EDDIE and Tom both finished tied for first in the 700K playoff shoot-around on DraftKings yesterday. So they were unfazed by any sort of NBA nonsense. Papa Gates, Broranosaurus Rex, or Broranosaurus Flex rather, 1-800-EDDIE, Tom JK, the four people that split the 700K shoot-around last night with a 5-person Magic stack. If you wanted to get to the top on DK, you needed DJ Augustine, Terrence Ross, James Ennis, Giannis, Nikola Vucevic, Markelle Fultz, LeBron James, and Goran Dragic. The 5-man Magic stack bringing back Giannis. That's what the necessary play was. 364 and a quarter.
Which, by the way, I mean, I liked Markelle Fultz yesterday. I like DJ Augustine also, but I had set a rule in Fantasy Cruncher to not put the two of them together in the same lineups, which seemed prudent to me before the slate, right? Because just figured they weren't going to be on the court together. One of them was going to probably play well. The other one was probably going to stay on the bench for more. And instead, they both played really well.
Yeah. Not only that, Fultz faded, but I thought the Fultz play was looking really tasty after that first quarter. Kind of quiet for the rest of the game. Augustine started to pick it up a little bit after his first rotation. I watched way too much Magic Bucks yesterday and not nearly enough of like basketball I actually want to see. Oh, well, what are you going to do? LeBron just with a monster, just overall, even in a loss, a really nice stat line, like a big triple-double, right?
Yeah, he had a triple-double at the end of the third quarter. In terms of real basketball, though, I put this out on Twitter. I don't know if a single player actually played well in that game, like relative to expectations. You know, so like LeBron did have the big triple-double, but he was inefficient scoring. He didn't make any plays in the fourth quarter, and the Lakers actually needed him to. AD was ridiculously inefficient. I guess
KCP wasn't very good. That much I can tell you.
No, he was not a single role player on the Lakers was remotely decent. They were all terrible. Like I thought the highlight of the night in terms of what really encompassed the Lakers role players in that game was there was a point in time where Kyle Kuzma was wide open in the corner with a 3 to tie the game and just bricked it off the side of the backboard. Like he almost shot it on the wrong side of the hoop. And that was really how the Lakers role players played last night.
Yeah, that was brutal. CJ was bad.
Carl Kuzma.
Yeah, Carl Kuzma. Shout out to Chuck on that bad boy. Unbelievable. CJ was really bad yesterday, even in a win. Really, really ugly basketball, all things considered. But that's fine. We'll see all of those games again tomorrow.
Yes, which we were talking about before. The biggest annoyance I have with this setup with the NBA schedule is that there's no mixing and matching of players. So we have the same 4 teams playing every other day. And the issue that this kind of creates for DFS is that we have like Luka Doncic is the one like real high-end player on today's slate. Then tomorrow is when we have Giannis, LeBron, AD, Damian Lillard, James Harden. All of them are stacked together. And that's a little annoying for DFS to not really get that diversity.
Oh, you mean Gary Clark's not the play for you?
No, Gary Clark,
starting for the Magic?
Gary Clark, no. Although with that said, I think every other day when we have those slates, we're going to be scrambling to find min-price guys who could produce anything just because there's so many of those high-end guys on the slate that it just stands to reason a couple of them are going to score like 60, 70 DK points or whatever, and we're going to need some min-price guys to jam in so we could, make those lineups work.
I'm looking at Jacob Goldstein's advanced box scores. It's just so brutal for that Blazers-Lakers game yesterday. Lillard was plus 5.7 points added. No one else on the Blazers was north of like a point and a half. And that was actually when Gabriel on the Lakers side, like KCP was dreadful. AD was good enough, but not nearly an AD game. Caruso really bad. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that on the Awesemo.com YouTube channel or not. I don't want to blaspheme.
He owns part of the site.
Yeah, I don't want to be blasphemous here, but it happens. Just a rough one. But we've got 4 different games to get into. As everybody comes in the door, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell. You guys know that jazz by now. This talk isn't going to be about the Jazz, though. This one's going to be about the Toronto Raptors and the Brooklyn Nets, kicking it off at 1:30. Raptors 11-point favorites. We kind of know what we're getting here. This might just be 4 straight blowouts. We shall see. Brooklyn kind of got back into it a little bit, but not really. This one was over before it started, as far as I'm concerned. Raptors aren't blowing something like this, but let's start here. We'll start on the Toronto side. Anybody that immediately stands out to you as sort of your favorite Raptor for the day?
So something else I thought was interesting. Marc Gasol was way chalkier than I expected in the first slate of the season, and especially in the DK final, he was almost 40% owned. He's one of the higher owned players, which I thought was really surprising. And one thing that was weird about his minutes breakdown is that he played, I think it was like 18 minutes in the first half, and then played like 2 or 3 minutes in the entire second half. He came out at one of the first whistles of the third quarter and never checked back into the game. So that meant that Serge Ibaka played most of the center minutes. I kind of think that Marc Gasol is going to go way overlooked now because of what happened in that spot. Like, he went really popular, didn't play a lot of minutes, still a plus matchup against the Nets centers. The Nets have been terrible against centers for years now. And I think that Marc Gasol, that was just a really weird game script. And I don't expect that to happen again. I think that going back to Marc Gasol makes some sense.
You and I are on the exact same page. Marc Gasol is my favorite play on DraftKings today at 4K, relative to salary, of course. It's not like I think Marc Gasol is going to drop 80. We have him projected for 12% ownership on DK and 4 on FanDuel. If that is the case, I am going to have a lot more than 12% Marc Gasol. I put him in for 28 minutes. Like, if this game is competitive, and that's sort of the way that I have to approach it to start the day, he's going to get a fourth quarter rotation. There was no need whatsoever to put him back out there. You didn't even really need 5 players with a heartbeat, honestly, for the Raptors, but he's going to get some sort of fourth quarter minutes to take him from the 2022 he has to, 28 plus. Love Gasol. And then, unfortunately, I'm going to go back to OG Anunoby. That was a tough sweat 2 days ago.
He got it done in the end, though.
He did, but it was not looking like a great play in those first 3 quarters. Do you have any interest in going back to OG Anunoby or going to OG Anunoby? I don't know if you had him last time.
So I did have exposure to Anunoby last time. I was under the field, which, it wasn't that hard to be under the field because he was ridiculously highly owned. But I kind of expected him to be popular. The one I didn't expect last slate was just the insane Marc Gasol ownership. And it wasn't that I thought he was a bad play last time. It was just that the ownership was way higher than I was expecting. But it also kind of highlighted to me, like, I guess there is reason to really like Marc Gasol in this matchup. And then he didn't play well, and now I'm probably going to be on him more than the field was last time. Anunoby, I think, is okay. Not really a priority for me at 4,400. He was below 4K last time. The rest of the Raptors guys are pretty expensive now, and especially with a little bit of the blowout risk that I think we have to factor in, there's other guys that I prefer to pay up for than Kyle Lowry, Fred VanVleet. Pascal Siakam is probably the guy I like the most of the expensive Raptors.
Okay. We have our ownership from like 5 minutes ago. So I ran a dummy crunch before the show started and just refreshed now. I currently have 90% Marc Gasol, which I feel like I can dial back a slight bit.
Yeah, maybe.
That's sort of where I'm going to be. That much I can tell you. If we're looking at just other potential Raptors, I'm not getting the sense that I'm going to have a lot here. Mostly just going to be Gasol, value for Anunoby, but we have Siakam, VanVleet, and Lowry all in like the 15 to 25% range in ownership on DraftKings. I have very little of those 3 guys, and I think that I'm okay with that. for all three of them to play well, obviously we're going to need the Nets to be good. I think it's so much easier for only one of those guys to really go off. I would probably set some sort of limit rule, honestly, on, maybe like max 2 of 3 for those guys. I don't see myself having a lot. Kyle Lowry, ultra chalky on FanDuel, though. 8K salary, 48% owned right now on FanDuel.
Yeah, I definitely don't like him that much, but just looking at the slate overall at the point guard options, it's really thin. I mean, there's Lowry, Jamal Murray, Kemba Walker, and then it drops off in a big way. Then there's, Seth Curry is the next most expensive player. So you kind of get cornered into playing Kyle Lowry on FanDuel, and I don't really mind it at that ownership there because there's nowhere else to go to.
Yeah, I'm pulling up my FanDuel sim right now. I also ran a dummy crunch there. I only had DraftKings open at the time. So much gets dictated to you on FanDuel based on positions. It's such a different structure than playing on DraftKings, where you can kind of roster anybody in any sort of order. Whereas on FanDuel, you're kind of playing like 5 separate games in one. And I think people lose track of that sometimes. So let me refresh for all this FanDuel ownership. There we go. So on FanDuel, it's you're really not looking at much. It's Lowry, Murray, Walker. I have Shake Milton grading out pretty well for a point guard relative to salary today. We can get into that a little bit later when we get to Philly. But yeah, I think chalk is probably necessary at point guard on FanDuel, unless you're really into Brad Wanamaker soaking up Gordon Hayward minutes or something along those lines. If we want to point out anybody on SuperDraft, that would be Fred VanVleet, 1.45x multiplier. I'd say he is my top guy from the Raptors. So in the grand scheme of things, do you expect to have a lot of exposure to Toronto?
So it's different on FanDuel versus DraftKings. Like, we both like Marc Gasol a lot on DraftKings. I like him on FanDuel also. I think that he's probably going to be really low on play just because people are going to go up to Jokic. They're going to go up to Embiid. So I think that just rostering Marc Gasol, especially on FanDuel, even if you play a bunch of lineups and only play him like 10% or something, you're just going to have yourself on such a different build than everybody else because of the way that changes the other positions you could spend up for. So Marc Gasol, I'm with you there. He's my favorite play overall. And then, I mean, there's no way to get away from Lowry on FanDuel. DraftKings, I have much less interest in him. Siakam, I think, is fine on both sites. And then when we talk about the Nets side, if you're going to play some of these Nets players, it kind of has to be with some of the Raptors guys, in my opinion. And if you're going to play multiple Raptors, I think we have to have Karis LeVert in that lineup also.
Okay. On my FanDuel dummy crunch, I'm not really getting to the rest of those Toronto guys. It is a pretty large fade of Kyle Lowry at this moment. Most of my point guard ownership going to Kemba and Jamal Murray. So
yeah, I think that's sensible also.
We shall see how that all shakes out. Let's go to the Brooklyn side. This one probably a little easier. All of their ownership is relatively flat. We don't have anybody really breaking free from the pack like Kyle Lowry is on FanDuel. Highest owned guy on FD is Karis LeVert at 21%. On DraftKings, it's LeVert at 28%. Does anything stand out to you from the Nets?
What were TLC's minutes last game? He played 33 minutes. Here's what's really tough. Like, I don't think that he's particularly good or anything. But if he's cheap and the Nets are going to play him like 35 minutes and he's going to have, a 20+% usage rating and just chuck up shots, like, I don't think he's a bad value play. So I think I have a moderate amount of interest in him.
Oh, he scares me. So I'm 2x the field right now. We have him projected at 10%. I have him at 18. Well, it looks like 2x because it's actually 9.9, but you know what I mean. So I have no problem going there, but I have no confidence in the minutes on the Nets outside of probably LeVert, Allen, Temple, Harris. Like, after that, they can pretty much play anybody at any amount of time, and I would believe it. And those 4 guys are only going to get that time because they're within 30 points. So that's a first 3 quarters thing. I just don't know how you really want to get to a Brooklyn guy unless you think there's someone that transcends the blowout, a guy that would play regardless. Otherwise, the Raptors just aren't the team to gack this away.
Which, isn't that kind of TLC though? Because if the game's close, he's probably shooting well. If it's garbage time, he's probably out there also. Like the game against the Bucks where they were 19.5-point underdogs, TLC played a lot of that game. He got more minutes than anybody in that spot. So he's the guy who I view as being the most blowout proof on the team. I think that whatever the game script is, he's probably going to be out there.
I think you're probably right. I have like 2x the field on both FanDuel and DraftKings. So I think I'm pretty satisfied there. The one guy I do want to take a look at that I think is going to kind of go, I don't want to say like ignored because he's going to have like 15% ownership. I don't want to sleep on Garrett Temple, particularly on FanDuel at 4,300. Adam's jamming all sorts of like Garrett Temple screenshots to me in my DMs right now. The only 3 that he made was contested. He missed a ton of wide open looks. I don't know what this chart is, but apparently it's supposed to tell me that I should he had 7 wide open field goal attempts in the game. He made none of them. Probably not going to continue that way. So,
well, it goes both ways.
Shout out to shit my money.
It goes both ways though, because Garrett Temple, a couple ways. One, no, he's not going to miss 7 wide open shot attempts again. I also kind of doubt the Raptors give him 7 wide open shot attempts again. And with Garrett Temple too, he actually played. He had a couple decent games in the bubble. He scored 36 DK points against the Blazers, or 33 against the Clippers, 37 against the Bucks. So I don't mind him, but I think I slightly prefer TLC.
Okay,
but I don't mind having lineups with Temple in them.
That is fair. As of right now, I have them basically equal. So I run a sim to see how often a player is a top 8 guy on DraftKings. Not raw points, not like getting over your basically like your GPP needed score. Temple's at 18%, TLC's at 17%. So a lot of that will just come down to ownership. I just think it's easier to be in different games. This one is so on paper not competitive that I feel like it's sort of the hardest one to get right. Any other takeaways from Brooklyn? LeVert, Allen, Joe Harris? Like these guys just all seem like they're priced where they should be.
Yeah, with Joe Harris, the issue I have with Joe Harris is he's such a good shooter, but to me, like his game is just it's so hollow outside of that. Like he could walk into some other counting stats just because he's on the court a lot. But for the season, what were his numbers? It was, 15 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists per game. He doesn't get defensive stats. So against a really tough defense in the Raptors, if he's not making his shots, like he's going to bust. His price has gotten more expensive. He was really chalky last slate, except it was because he was way cheaper. It's like $1,000 less expensive. So to me, Joe Harris is, I'd much rather roster some of the other guys on this and other players on the slate also, because the other issue too is just like you said, it's not a good game environment. The Raptors have the second best defensive efficiency in the NBA. And I also think there's a pretty good amount of blowout risk in that spot too. We
are on the same page here. We have Joe Harris at 25% ownership on DraftKings right now. I have him in 2 lineups. Just don't think I'm going to be getting there. I think we can keep this one moving and talk about a game that's a lot more interesting. This Nuggets Jazz game was fantastic to watch 2 days ago when Mitchell and Murray really started going back and forth, and you can see them both reacting to each other on the floor. I can't remember which one hit it. I'm almost positive Murray came down and hit a double crossover step back, like 20-footer. And then they went to a timeout. You just see Donovan Mitchell being like, all right, we're going to keep doing this. So definitely an interesting game to watch. Let's talk about Denver to start. Again, no one getting any crazy ownership on the Denver side. 29% to Jokic is the high number on FanDuel. 27 to Jokic on DraftKings is the high number there. Really like Jokic at 1.3x as a multiplier on SuperDraft. Who do you like the most from Denver?
Yeah, Jokic makes sense, especially just because we have a lack of high-end guys to pay up for on the slate. So there's Luka Doncic, who may or may not have Kristaps Porzingis in the lineup, so that would probably make him a pretty obvious play. But then if there's going to be a decent amount of value, which it does seem like there are cheap guys available to us on DraftKings, we're going to need a secondary star to pay up for, and Jokic is the guy who makes the most sense to me. Even though Rudy Gobert is a great defender, overall team defender, in general, centers have had a pretty good amount of success against the Jazz for fantasy over the last couple of years. So I don't think this is a terrible matchup for Jokic. He's played well against Utah so far this year. The one thing I'll say about this game, it's not going to overtime again. No. And even though the ownership projections aren't that high right now, I kind of have a feeling they're going to be higher by the time the slate locks, just because there's going to be so many people looking at the box score from the last game and the game before and just be like, oh, look at all the fantasy points everybody scores in these matchups. Like, yeah, because one of the games went to overtime, the other went to double overtime.
Yeah.
And it's not going to happen again.
No.
So I kind of feel that other than Jokic, I think I'm going to be underweight to a lot of these players, unless this ownership that's currently projected holds true. I expect it to go up as we get closer to lock.
So I don't have much of this game, but I am on a couple of things mildly extreme.
Jordan Clarkson?
Not too extreme, although he's really just difficult to get away from. He's going to shoot, no matter how well Donovan Mitchell is shooting or how many shots Donovan Mitchell is taking, Jordan Clarkson's not going to be like, got to get him the ball. He's going to shoot Donovan Mitchell out of like hot streaks. I'll always roster a dude like that. I don't think that I'm going to go too crazy. The public ownership is already there. So I can't avoid him. I think he's like solid chalk. He's 42% owned on DraftKings. That's a pretty big number.
I agree. I wrote that in the building blocks article that I did at Awesemo.com for today's slate. The other thing too is, all right, so Jordan Clarkson, if you had to make a list of players, you watch them play and it's like, oh, that guy rostered himself in DFS. Jordan Clarkson is way up on top of the list because Jordan Clarkson touches the ball. It's like he's shooting. There's no doubt about it. He's not going to pass. He's shooting. It doesn't matter how bad the shot is. He's getting his shot up. He's trying to score fantasy points. And if you look at his usage rating of the ball, I think he only has one game with the usage rating under 29%. Like he gets on the floor, he just shoots. And with the Jazz so thin, also no Boyan Bogdanovic, no Mike Conley, they have no choice but to play him.
So the two guys that are standing out most to me, Jamal Murray and Paul Millsap. I want to get your thoughts on both.
Let's see. So Paul Millsap, 4,300 on DraftKings.
22% ownership projected right now.
So here's what gives me a little bit of pause here, looking at his minutes played. The double overtime game against Utah, he played 22 minutes. Last game in overtime, 29 minutes. I don't know that they're really going to extend him all that much. I mean, I think it's possible, but that's the big hesitancy I have is how many minutes is Paul Millsap going to play? Because there were spots earlier in the year where I played Paul Millsap. I was like, this is a great spot for Paul Millsap. There was a couple spots where he was chalk earlier in the year. I think maybe like the Christmas Day slate was one that stands out also, where it's like, oh, this is a great spot for Paul Millsap. He's too cheap. And then he plays like 26 minutes and has a very like whatever game. I don't know how much upside he has in tournaments.
His rotation is really weird. I don't think that there's anybody that would have expected the Nuggets to close Murray, Monty Morris, PJ Dozier, Jeremy Grant, Nikola Jokic. I don't think there's a person on the planet that would have thought those are the five guys that they're going to play for the entirety of an overtime period. Now, whether that's adding back in Michael Porter in place of someone, sure. I think Dozier, obviously, probably the first guy to go from this lineup.
Yeah, for sure.
But
Monty Morris second.
Like Paul Millsap played 29 minutes. He came out after a full rotation at the beginning of the fourth and just never saw the floor again. I think that's probably, I don't want to say the exception and not the norm, because if you told me that they just like went to Porter instead of Millsap because they're trying to come back, that I think that's viable too. I was really surprised to not see Millsap go on the floor because they were winning in overtime, where you would expect Paul Millsap to be sort of the defensive guy that you want to go to maintain a lead, not PJ Dozier. And like, I understood why Michael Porter Jr. didn't come back in. He couldn't handle a defensive rotation.
He can't defend anybody. No, they were literally, if Donovan Mitchell got the ball, they were setting a high screen, switching on to Michael Porter, and it was a free 2 points every single time. And then Michael Malone was like, okay, we're not doing this anymore. Michael Porter Jr. off the court. But here's the other side of that. I think Michael Porter Jr. is a pretty interesting GPP play for this slate. I have to see what his
7K, 9% projected ownership.
So it's hard to deny the floor is very low for Michael Porter Jr. Like you can never consider him in a cash game at this point. But
yeah, plus I think Mike Malone just hates him. So his floor is because he might not be on the floor because he like told Mike Malone that his coronavirus wasn't real.
Yeah, that's true also. There's so many shot jokes about Michael Porter Jr. online and they get repeated over and over again, but they're still kind of funny every time. But either way, Michael Porter Jr., it's hard to deny the upside at the same time also. Like if he makes shots early, not out of the realm of possibility, then I think he just his offense is good enough that they leave him on the floor anyway. And if he's going to be a guy who's sub 10% owned at 7,000, like, it seems like a high price tag, but not really compared to some of what we saw him do, earlier in the bubble. I don't think that he's a bad GPP play. I think that as a contrarian play, somebody I'm interested in.
Okay. And the other guy that I do want to touch on, and I think was probably going to go, or at least I'm hoping goes overlooked. It seems like he is. On FanDuel, it's 1% ownership. On DraftKings, it's 5.5%. Torrey Craig fouled out. I think they want to have Torrey Craig out on the floor at all times. He picked up 3 fouls in a 2-minute and 46-second stint in the second quarter and then missed the rest of his second quarter rotation. He then picked up a foul in 34 seconds to start the third quarter, missed his entire third quarter rotation before getting a full closing rotation and then fouling out at the end of the game. He played 21 minutes, but he probably lost like 9 or more minutes just from foul trouble. I'm projecting Torrey Craig for 30 minutes. I think he's a fantastic paydown option. 3,100 on DraftKings. Look, you're not going to get it's not like Torrey Craig's going out there and trying to score. He's not like your classic DFS guy, but for 30 minutes at a essentially unowned and $100 above the minimum, I think he's going to go overlooked because of the minutes that he played, and not enough people are going to look into why he wasn't on the floor.
Yeah, and if we look at his last game against Utah, now that his box scores up, he played 34 minutes in that game, also fouled out in a double overtime game. So I almost get the sense, like what you said, I'm going to agree with you here, that Torrey Craig is just going to play as many minutes as he can until he fouls out guarding Donovan Mitchell. And at min price, I definitely think he makes sense. And then he sets you up in a spot where, on DraftKings, you could pretty easily roster a Nikola Jokic, you could roster Luka Doncic when you have somebody that cheap in the lineup. So I like Torrey Craig as a call. He was somebody who I was not really considering, and now looking at his info over the last few games, I think you've brought me on to Torrey Craig.
Okay, I like it. Well, once again, kudos to Ship My Money, who talked me into him a little bit more. I had 4 minutes sort of just hanging in the ether, didn't know how I wanted to appropriate them. After talking to Adam, slid them over to Torrey Craig. Now Torrey Craig is the dude. Is there a dude from Utah? Do you go back to Donovan Mitchell? Because this doesn't strike me as a spot I want to be. 9,200 on DraftKings. I can't imagine he's just going to break playoff records again.
No, and here's the thing too is, so when I wrote my articles last night and I didn't have ownership, I just assumed Donovan Mitchell was going to be popular, regardless of what his price was, because I think that there's just so many people who chase points where they're just like, Donovan Mitchell was low owned last slate. He broke everything. Therefore, I have to roster Donovan Mitchell again. But he's only projected for 9% ownership on DraftKings. It's was it 15% on FanDuel?
Yeah,
I can't imagine those numbers are going to be that low by lock. Give me the over before I take the under on that number. So to me, I was pretty keen to just say hey, I'm not going to have Donovan Mitchell in my player pool today because he's overpriced. Everybody's going to roster him. Maybe I'm going to back off that stance a little bit if he's going to have no ownership, but I don't think that's going to be the case come later in the day.
I would be shocked if I had him more than one lineup on FanDuel, just given that price, or on DraftKings rather, given that price tag.
Yeah,
on FanDuel at 8,200, that opens him up. But to go to him on DK, you very specifically need exactly what he did in their last game. There's not much way around it. That's a big time ask of him. He's not the most efficient player in the world. If that doesn't get going early, it could get pretty bad. I think that he is just a pretty easy fade on DK, given what's above him. I'd rather just spend a little bit more, we're going to name centers here, but even $800 more, I feel a lot more confident with Kawhi at 10K than I do at Donovan Mitchell at 92.
Yeah, and Paul George is cheaper than him on both sides.
Right.
Paul George is a better fantasy player and a better real life player than Donovan Mitchell. Last game aside, I don't really think it's that close. And I think on FanDuel, I would be kind of surprised if Donovan Mitchell actually has lower ownership than Paul George by the time lock comes around. So I think that Paul George is the easy pivot off of Donovan Mitchell. And the other thing with Mitchell too that you brought up is the efficiency. He made 57.6% of his field goal attempts last game, took 33 shots, 43.8% usage. So if he misses some of the shots early, which I think we expect him to do, there's no way he's going to be anywhere near that efficient again. He's not going to take as many shots. The reason he took so many shots was because they kept going in, and they also needed him to shoot because it was the only way they were staying in the game. the other thing I think too is there might be a little sneaky amount of blowout potential in this game. Even though it's only a 4-point spread, I think the Nuggets are vastly better than the Jazz without Mike Conley and Bojan Bogdanovic.
I completely agree with you there. Let's just look at it like this. Mitchell is at 8.7% ownership on DK. Jamal Murray is at 12 and change. He's $2,000 cheaper. I just think that Jamal Murray has a much easier time hitting a score that you need at his price tag than Donovan Mitchell does.
Yeah, for sure. And even for the season, like, did they average that much different DK fantasy points per game?
I have Jamal Murray as a 1.08 FanDuel point per minute guy in my model. Just like baseline, these are his rates. This is how he would show up unadjusted. I've Donovan Mitchell at 1.13. We're talking about 0.05 fantasy points per minute for two guys that are now separated by $2,000. That should play about the same in minutes. Mitch, you would probably set the line at Mitchell -2 or something along those lines to be pretty close, but the guys are going to be out there. That doesn't make up 2,000. So sign me up for Murray over Mitchell in this spot.
Yeah, I agree, especially relative to price.
Do you want to touch on anything else from this Denver-Utah game? Are you into Gobert or Ingles? Is it Royce O'Neal season again?
I don't mind Royce O'Neal. I mean, if we look at him last game, he was really popular and really, really sucked. He played 32 minutes. He got into foul trouble. Didn't play at all in overtime or down the stretch of the game. 3 points, 7 rebounds. So he scored 13.75 DK fantasy points in what was basically as bad as he could possibly play. He didn't take shots. He didn't make the ones he took. He did nothing else. And if we look at him overall, he averaged over 20 DK points as a starter for the season. So without Mike Conley, without Bogdanovic, I think it makes sense to assume that we're going to get 20 plus fantasy points from Royce O'Neal in this spot more often than not, and maybe even closer to 25 fantasy points. And I think that he should play way more minutes than Juwan Morgan. Just the way that the game shook out last time, he got into foul trouble. He didn't play well. And that's kind of what limited him to 31 minutes. Royce O'Neal is somebody who could easily play 35 plus minutes in this game. I don't mind him as a value play. But Jordan Clarkson has to be the preferred value play, not just in this game, but on the entire slate.
I'm with you on the Jordan Clarkson play. No-brainer cash option. If Royce O'Neal really ends up with 5 times as much ownership as Torrey Craig, you guys know what to do. There's an easy GPP pivot.
Do you have any interest in Royce O'Neal overall, though?
Probably not. I mean, look, at 3,700, I don't mind it because those minutes are going to be there. I think there are better ways to spend around 4,000 than Royce O'Neal today if his ownership is already there. And on FanDuel at 4,400, I'm just going to stay away.
Fair enough.
2 games up, 2 games down. We've got 2 more to go. But first, I want to talk a little bit about the free content we've got going today at Awesemo.com. MLB rankings. NBA projections, which I'm assuming based on the people that are watching this show would be most interested in that piece. So NBA projections are free today on the site. Go to Awesemo.com to check them out. NHL ownership projections and PGA rankings. You can get all 4 of those items free today just by going to the website. Or if it's more interesting to you, you could use the promo code MAMBA, MAMBA, get an Awesemo weekly pass for $8.24. That's 50% off. You get access to everything we've got. NBA tools, player projections, ownership, the boom bust tool. We got more than that. This offer is going to run until the 24th of August, 8/24. You get it, Kobe's jersey numbers. Use that promo code MAMBA if you want to sign up. Get that Awesemo Plus NBA weekly package. Highly recommend you do it. We've got the goods, people. Come check it out. And hit that thumbs up. 893 people in here, 119 likes. It's time for me to shill for the likes. Hit that thumbs up. We need to get that number north of 200. Set up the baseball guys well with a bunch of thumbs up before they get on the show after we are done. Greg, 2 more games to go here. This series is sad. No Ben Simmons, now no Gordon Hayward. I just wanted to see these guys play at full strength, and I don't think that we're going to be getting that. Celtics 4.5-point favorites here. Let's start on the Boston side. Both Tatum and Kemba Walker in the 30s in ownership on FanDuel. Nothing too crazy on DK. High teens. Kemba topping out at 21%. Kemba Walker also 1.6 multiplier on SuperDraft. Just get him, guys. That's the spot to do it. What do you want to do with Boston here?
Yeah, so I mean, first we have to talk about Gordon Hayward being out and what to do with that information. So with him off the court, Jason Tatum gets the biggest usage bump. He goes from 28.8% usage to 31.7% usage when Hayward is off the court. There's also a little bit more usage that goes towards Kemba Walker. Like, I'm expecting a breakout from Kemba Walker sooner rather than later. He's just so much cheaper than we're accustomed to seeing him. And it makes sense because he played with a minutes restriction all through the bubble restart, but it wasn't because of any actual concern about the knee. It was just that, you know, the Celtics games didn't matter. And they wanted to save Kemba Walker for the playoffs. They wanted to make sure that he was good to go. Now that we're here, he played 35 minutes last game. Usage rating 25%. He was not terrible for fantasy, certainly not good either. But there's going to be better games coming. If we look at him, only 5 assists. He only had 1 rebound, 19 points. It was fine, but I kind of like it just because he kept his price in check. And I think that this is a really good spot to roster Kemba Walker. He's overall one of my favorite GPP plays on the slate because we have such a large sample size of Kemba Walker being a good fantasy player. Even earlier in the year with this same Celtics team, he was, what was his? His price was over 8,000 on both sites. It got to 9,000 on FanDuel. So we look at where he's priced now. Like, I think that's such a good thing to look at for just baseline, a baseline expectation for production is just what is the guy's historical price for this season when everything was normal, when everybody was healthy. And that's where I look at Kemba Walker is just so much cheaper than when he was earlier in the year. Like, he stands out to me as a really strong play.
Kemba Walker, 2x the field on FanDuel, 2x the field on DraftKings. You and I are on the exact same page here. His price is just simply too cheap. And he's the kind of guy that sort of beats up Philly too. So I'm full stop in his ownership right now, not slowing me down. I like him even more on DraftKings where he's actually getting owned a bit less. I don't really have much issue going to Tatum, but since the ownership is already there, it's not like it's a big stand. I'll probably just be around the field. We've got him at 16% on FanDuel. That's where I'm at. We've got him at 30 on DK. Nope, flip those. We've got him at 30 on FanDuel. That's where I'm at. We've got him at 16 on DK. That's also where I'm at. I don't see myself going to much Marcus Smart or Jaylen Brown. Tice looks okay on FanDuel at 5K. Don't really know what to make of him in this matchup, but I don't mind using him as a bit of a flyer. But the guys that I'm looking at from Boston, Kemba, number 1 with a bullet, and then Tatum and Tice would be my 2 and 3. Do you have anybody else from Boston?
No, I'll just echo that Jaylen Brown I don't think makes for a good play in this spot. He does get a couple extra minutes without Hayward in there for me, except the issue is just that his usage stays the same. So with Hayward off the floor, 24.8% usage, same exact usage as a number for the season. So it helps them a little bit to get those extra minutes. But I think that Tatum and Kemba Walker both make for stronger plays. I even think Marcus Smart makes for a little bit of a stronger play than Jaylen Brown. So just in the interest of not having lineups that have, you know, a million Celtics players in them, Jaylen Brown just doesn't make the cut because there's better guys from this team to roster.
Do you think anybody benefits from Gordon Hayward being out?
Well,
not just like so-and-so gets slightly better, like Tatum gets slightly better or whatever, like not in that regard, but I don't think that this opens up anybody new.
No, because the issue is like looking at the minutes, I was trying to figure this out too, is there any cheap guy that I would expect to play a bunch of minutes now? And it's like, I guess I give 5 extra minutes to Brad Wanamaker, but that doesn't make him playable. He's 3,100. He's going to play 15 minutes now as a subpar fantasy producer. I'm not interested in that. Semi Ojeleye, maybe he gets like 10 minutes, but you know, who wants to roster Semi Ojeleye in 10 minutes? Who wants to roster Semi Ojeleye in 30 minutes? So there's
not me. Exactly. Brad Stevens, maybe?
Yeah. Brad Stevens will play Brad Stevens will play Semi Ojeleye against, you know, anybody, and he never produces anything fantasy wise. Semi Ojeleye this year, what was his points per? Yeah, he played 15 minutes per game this year and scored like 7 fantasy points per game. He's terrible per minute. Maybe Grant Williams gets a couple extra minutes, but still not enough for me to roster him. And that's kind of how I think the Celtics are going to play this. Is there's going to be a bunch of guys off the bench who are cheap in fantasy. They're going to play like 10 to 15 minutes, and none of them are going to be DFS. Right?
Yeah, we are on the same page there. Nobody else popped up for me, even redistributing 30 plus minutes. So Kemba all the way. On the Philly side, number 1 with a bullet for me is Joel Embiid. 9,900 on DraftKings, 9,300 on FanDuel. He's going to play monster minutes, or at least he's going to try. The matchup is perfect for him. I can't imagine wanting to go a different direction He grades out really well on both sites. Regardless of ownership, I'm going to have at least the field of Joel Embiid.
Yeah, I think it's a good spot for Embiid. Over 30% usage rating last game. Ben Simmons off the court. They have no choice but to go to Embiid for a massive role, because if Embiid doesn't play big minutes, if he doesn't play well, the Sixers get crushed in this spot. That's the reality of this team, is that they're super reliant on Embiid now. So to me, the question then becomes, who do I prefer in a similar price range, Joel Embiid or Nikola Jokic, especially for people who are only making one lineup if they're choosing one or the other. I lean towards Embiid in that situation. How do you feel between those two?
Same. It's not a comfortable feeling at all, that's for sure. I mean, we're talking about like sort of coin flippy type guys. You're never going to feel bad having either one of them be the last guy that takes that spot, but I have Embiid grading out slightly better. He was number one in the NBA DFS contenders today.
All right, nice. So, which, if you guys follow Josh Engleman on Twitter, he'll be posting that out later. That's a guarantee. That's a lock of the slate. Very true. So I think that's going to be a question that people are going to come across, and that we'll end up getting later in the day. Is people will be building on to be like, hey, Embiid or Jokic. And to me, I lean slightly towards Embiid in that spot.
Do you lean towards anybody else here? I've got a pretty decent chunk of Shake Milton and Alec Burks on FanDuel. Milton 3,900, Burks 4,100. On DraftKings, I'm not really getting to much else. Rotating through some of the guys that should play big minutes, Thibault, Richardson, but not getting to Tobias Harris in any sort of way. He's the second most owned guy on FanDuel. I like the value there in Milton and Burks. I don't really like much else from Philly. I just don't really like Philly, but I don't think Philly likes Philly either.
Yeah, the fans definitely don't like Philly. That's for sure. I've been on Twitter.com before. Here's something interesting. I kind of think if any team makes a lineup change today, I think it would be the Sixers starting Thibault ahead of Shake Milton. If we look at how the minutes shook out last game, Milton played 26 minutes and Thibault played almost 30. He actually played 33 minutes. And I kind of think that's a sensible switch for the Celtics to make, especially because they don't need that Shake Milton floor space now that Ben Simmons isn't in the lineup anyway. And as much as people think of Thibault as a bad offensive player, because he's not a terrible shooter. He's like a 35% three-point shooter. So the one thing he's capable of doing on offense is, catching threes and making open shots. So I think that's a starting lineup change that I wouldn't be shocked to see happen today.
Well, that's not great for my Shake Milton exposure as of right now. But
I'm just throwing out a theory. I don't necessarily think that's for sure happening. I kind of have a hunch that could be the case, though.
I mean, Milton then still plays, 24 plus minutes probably regardless. And in an interesting way might be more viable from an offense perspective in that regard. Does make me want to pump the brakes a little bit. So does that make you like Thibault at all?
Not really on DraftKings, but let me just look at all the small forward options overall on FanDuel. I mean, there's Kawhi Leonard and Pascal Siakam at the high end. Tobias Harris, I do think, makes for a much better play on FanDuel and DraftKings. He gets a usage bump. Sans Ben Simmons, and he's $500 cheaper on FanDuel. I think from an ownership standpoint, Thibault is interesting on FanDuel, mostly because of the defensive stats, where he's a guy who could rack up a bunch of steals and blocks. Like, look at his last couple games. Against Celtics, he had 2 steals and a block. The game against the Rockets, he had 4 steals and 2 blocks. So he's a guy on FanDuel where defensive stats are worth 3 points each, where it's not that unlikely that he gets 5 or 6 stocks in the game and just ends up scoring 25, 30 FanDuel points. And in that situation, him at low ownership, I think makes for a good GPP play.
All right, here's the question for you then on FanDuel. Would you rather roster Thibault 3,900, projected 7.5% ownership, or Dorian Finney-Smith at 4,400, projected for 13% ownership?
So here's the issue, and this is going to be a real wishy-washy answer, but Kristaps Porzingis is questionable.
Sure.
If Porzingis is out, not only does Finney-Smith make for a better play, but he's going to be fairly popular in that situation, I assume. So it depends on what happens with Porzingis. If Porzingis plays, then I like Thibault more. If Porzingis is out, I like DFS more.
Okay, but not a wishy-washy answer. You're giving everybody the actual answer.
It is the actual answer, except it's not a definitive one at this point in the day, which maybe that's not that ridiculous because it's 10:30 a.m. Eastern time.
we're going to get to it shortly, but I'm assuming you think he plays?
Yeah, like how did he even get hurt? He got ejected in that game.
Throwing those air punches, injured his shoulder.
It's a knee injury.
Yeah.
And it's very odd to me. The other thing too is, I mean, the Mavericks had Luka Doncic and Kristaps Porzingis listed on the injury report a ton this year.
Yeah.
But to me, it was like, yeah, it's just regular season. They're giving themselves an out to potentially rule guys out. Like for the playoffs, I can't imagine Porzingis is actually going to sit, especially because, you know, the magnitude of this game, they're down 1-0. They don't want to go down 2-0 to the Clippers. The other side of that is if he's actually seriously injured, then I guess there is a chance that he wouldn't play. I just don't see how that's the case when he barely played last game because he got ejected.
My expectation is that Kristaps Porzingis is a 7'3" guy who already has a reconstructed knee, and you can probably list him as questionable for the rest of his career based on the comings and goings of swelling in his knee. I'm assuming there are days where it's just never going to feel okay and days where he might potentially sit out. You still have to list people as questionable in those things. You can't just you can't pretend that injuries don't exist any longer. So I understand the Q tag. I just expect him to be ruled in the long run. If he is ruled out, that's really scary for Dallas.
Yeah, and it's great for Luka Doncic's fantasy value, unless they get blown out. But I mean, they played the Clippers fairly tough last game, even after Porzingis got ruled out. And there was a part of me, like I'm a huge Luka fan, and there's a part of me that thought like this could be a bad situation for him. Like just in terms of public sentiment, where people are already kind of ready to jump on Luka, and just the idea like he's going to be guarded by Paul George and Kawhi Leonard over the course of the game. He handled it fine last game. Like he took his bumps and bruises, hurt his ankle early in the game, came back and put up a monster stat line overall. On FanDuel, only 10,500. What is he on? DraftKings, he is 11,000. That's a pretty reasonable price tag for Luka because he's probably going to push for 40 minutes in this spot. And I kind of think that he's going to get his fantasy points when he's on the court, regardless of who guards him. So I like Luka a lot. And the other thing too is that, as we mentioned earlier, with the way these slates break out, with the games staggered, the same players playing every other day, Luka's by far the top fantasy option on this slate in terms of just raw projected points. Because we have the slate, the one tomorrow is so stacked with all the stars that Luka just kind of gets left by himself. So if we like Torrey Craig, if there's some other cheap guys, Jordan Clarkson we have salary to spend, and it just makes sense that it's going to end up being Luka, and it's hard to not be overweight on him in that situation.
Yeah, I have Luka by 5.3 fantasy points over Kawhi Leonard today as the top scorer, the only guy north of 60 on DK. Do you have anything else you want to touch on for Boston Philly?
No, I don't. I think we got that one.
Okay. Before we finish this bad boy off, I want to talk a little bit about SuperDraft, the presenting sponsor of this show. You don't have to worry about salaries at SuperDraft. You can roster anybody you want. That makes it's slightly more fun because you can, make some decisions and actually just take guys you want to see play. But you can get someone like Kemba Walker today, 1.6x multiplier. That's monstrous. Jason Tatum coming in 1.25. You could roster them both together just because of those multipliers. They have contests for basketball, PGA, NASCAR, MMA, baseball. God, the NFL season is right around the corner. And if that exists, SuperDraft will have contests for it. You can use the promo code Awesemo10, AWESEMO10. Get $10 on your first deposit of $10 or more. Get $20 on your first deposit of $100 or more. You can download their app in the App Store or just go to superdraft.io. It's SuperDraft, no limits, more winning. Now, let's talk a little bit about this Dallas and Clippers game. Do you have the line handy for game one by any chance?
Yeah, I'm seeing the Clippers favored by 6. This game also by a decent margin has the biggest total on the slate because 229.5, and we've got two really low total games: Denver, Utah, 217, and Philly, Boston, 216.
Not sure if you heard me. Do you have the line for the first game handy? Do you know what the line was in game one?
I don't. I think it was 5.5 points, if I remember correctly, though.
Okay, so they're baking in a little tiny hair of, Kristaps Porzingis being potentially like 10% out. So, okay. I was trying to see if we can glean any information from like a 3-point difference in a line from game one to game two. might be something to pay attention to. But for now, it seems like they're close enough that you're getting just the questionable status, so to speak. Let's start on the Clippers side, where I really like Kawhi Leonard today. And that is generally problematic. The problem is Paul George is so cheap that it creates this weird scenario where I don't know who I really want out of both of them. And I find myself a little apprehensive of having both guys in the same lineup, which I don't think that I should on a 4-gamer. But let's talk about it holistically. Do you prefer Kawhi or Paul George?
So relative to price, I prefer Paul George. Let me check what the ownership is, though. Is there a big difference in ownership between the two?
On FanDuel, it's Kawhi at 35, Paul George at 27. On DraftKings, it's Kawhi at 16, Paul George at 21.
All right, so it's not that much of a difference. Considering that, I like Paul George just because he's cheaper. I think he makes for the better per dollar play. Overall, for the season, Kawhi actually did average a decent amount more fantasy points, but Paul George also played limited minutes for a lot of the year because he had the wonky situation with double shoulder surgery.
Yeah.
Still, for the difference in price, like I think in the playoffs, I don't know that Kawhi Leonard is going to be that much better of a fantasy producer than Paul George. Like I think it's going to be relatively similar with a slight lean towards Leonard. So for the difference in price, give me Paul George. The other thing too, especially on FanDuel, where I think that Donovan Mitchell could end up being really popular, Paul George is just such a reasonable pivot to me. He's $100 cheaper and somebody who I expect to score more fantasy points than Donovan Mitchell anyway. But then, like you said, I don't necessarily really want to have lineups with Paul George and Kawhi Leonard together. At the very least, if they do, Luka Doncic has to be in that lineup if both of them are in it.
Yeah. It's just really hard because I would never set a rule max one of Kawhi and Paul George because not for 150 lineups. That's silly. You should absolutely have them in some of your lineups together. There's like, they don't fully take away from each other in any, and Paul George's price sort of makes it a little bit more viable, but I would want to pay close attention to how many of a 150 max I actually got of the two of them together. I think it's probably going to be a decent chunk for me. I have a ton of Kawhi. I'm well over the field on Paul George on both sites. I don't see a way around it. The reason that I like it a lot for Kawhi is because of Marcus Morris. Marcus Morris's like ability to defend is going to save Kawhi a little bit on the offensive end, especially in these early series. Kawhi doesn't have to take the most difficult assignment on every possession any longer because Marcus Morris can be on the floor. I think that's super helpful. It's just like if he has to do that 10 less times, that's 10 less possessions where he's locked up in a defensive stance trying to make sure Luka's not going anywhere or insert whoever he's guarding here. So I like both of those guys. After that, I can't imagine having much of a Clipper. Maybe a little Lou Will.
I like Lou Williams. And
I don't want to go to Pat Bev.
No, I especially because I just think there's better value plays. And maybe on FanDuel, I'll have more interest in Patrick Beverley just because the point guard options are so thin where it's like I have to roster somebody and there's like 6 viable point guards on the entire slate. So that's where Patrick Beverley comes into play. But if we look at Lou Williams, for the season, like even coming off the bench, he was a pretty good fantasy producer. He scored almost 30 fantasy points per game as a reserve player, 28 minutes per game off the bench. And they didn't play him a whole lot down the stretch of the season, which was kind of reasonable, right? He got the late start and then the games just didn't matter. So they're just kind of building him up. 31 minutes for him last game. And that's typically more than he plays off the bench. It's a plus matchup against the Mavericks. So if he's going to play 30 or more minutes, like the expectation is for over 30 fantasy points. And he is, he's mid 5,000 price range guy. His projected ownership is low, 15% on DraftKings and 10% on FanDuel. Like for that kind of ownership and the kind of upside he has, because he's a guy who could come in and just score a ton of points really quickly. So I like Lou Williams' upside.
He makes me nervous for this reason. How many minutes do you have Kawhi Leonard projected for today?
Let's see. 35.
Ooh, okay. Little bit better than for Lou Will, obviously. If Kawhi plays bigger minutes, let's say 38 to 40, something in that neighborhood, the amount of minutes that Lou Will can play without him obviously goes down. That's not a hot take there. That's just how that works. With Kawhi Leonard on the floor this year, Lou Will has played 795 minutes. His usage in that time, 22%. 0.88 FanDuel points per minute. He's just simply a different player when Kawhi is out there. You have to assume Paul George also out on the floor for a big chunk of that time. I think he sort of gets lost in the shuffle. I would like Lou Will, but I almost like him in lineups where I don't have one of Kawhi or Paul George, where you sort of need a different narrative for the game, some sort of reason why Kawhi Leonard isn't on the floor, or Lou Will gets so hot so early that they sort of take that back seat to him offensively, do a little bit more on the defensive end. The way that those three guys work together is really interesting from a DFS perspective.
Yeah, so I'd say in terms of setting a rule for Fantasy Cruncher, I would say never having all three of Lou Williams, Paul George, and Kawhi Leonard in a lineup at the same time. I might be a little light on Kawhi Leonard's minutes. I was just kind of looking at his minutes for the season, where they've just been so, restrictive with him at times that it's hard for me to really look at Kawhi Leonard and be like, oh, Kawhi Leonard's playing 40 minutes. Kawhi Leonard's playing 39 minutes. I know he played, 37 minutes last game, but
he played 37 minutes on August 4th and 38 on August 6th.
Yeah, so I guess I could give him more minutes. I just hesitate to look at the Clippers and be like, hey, Paul George and Kawhi Leonard are going to play a ton of minutes, just because I want to reserve the amount of ownership I have on them a little bit, just because they are cautious with them at times.
No, that totally makes some sense. When I was digging in to make some rate adjustments, just seeing how big of a bite that takes out of Lou Will, I started thinking about the machinations of how I would want lineups to come out if I were using him, because there's clearly a ceiling on Lou Will that doesn't exist on a lot of players. He can, when that gets going, he's like the best version of Jordan Clarkson.
Yes, that's it. He's Jordan Clarkson 2.0.
Yeah.
The other thing, I'm just going to throw out one other player. If we find out that Montrezl Harrell is playing full minutes today, then I'm interested in Montrezl Harrell. I just don't think that's going to be the case.
Same. I gave him 20, I believe. Let me double check. No, 18. I gave him 18.
He only played 15 minutes last game. For the season, though, he averaged 28 minutes per game, and his price is way down. So if he was to play normal minutes, then he becomes a good GPP option. That doesn't seem like it's going to be the case, but since the playoffs, who knows?
Yeah, them winning game one is really massive for being able to bring Harrell along slower than you would really want to. He hasn't, I think they said he hadn't played basketball in a month or something along those lines. He was just fully not involved. And as of right now, let's see if I can, where the hell did that futures line go? Okay, I was looking at this immediately before we started this. Did they pull the series prices already off of DK?
I could bring it up.
I think they did.
It's been really wonky with some of their pricing, because there's been times where they just pull down all of the NBA games.
I got it. It's in another tab. The Clippers are minus 1,000. Dallas is plus 600. You just don't have to let Harrell rip yet. They are in a position where they can bring him along slowly. They're in here for the long game. So yeah, I gave him 18 minutes. I would certainly love him if I thought he was getting more at 4,600 on DK. And then we got to go to the Dallas side. You're going to be able to get all the way up to Luka Doncic at 11K on DraftKings?
Yeah, I think pretty easily, especially just because we said we like Torrey Craig at mint price. Jordan Clarkson is cheap also. There's some good cheap plays, and just with that considered, you have to pay up for somebody. And Luka's the only player on DraftKings who's over 10,000. So he just fits in the lineups really easily. 10,500 on FanDuel is also, that's a pretty ridiculously cheap price tag for him. So I think on both sides, he's going to be probably my highest owned player. I don't know until I make lineups later, but that's probably going to be the case, just because if you're rostering any value guys, Doncic just kind of ends up in those lineups anyway. The other thing too is we talked about Kawhi Leonard, we talked about Paul George. If you're going to roster those guys together, you have to have Luka in those lineups, because there's no situation where this is a competitive game that Luka doesn't score a ton of fantasy points.
Yeah, right now I have 50% Luka on both FanDuel and DraftKings. I also have a ton of the rest of Dallas. I've got a really big chunk of Maxey at 3,600 on DK. Have him on FanDuel as well at 3,900. I've got a decent amount of DFS, 4,300 on DraftKings, 4,400 on FanDuel, double the field or more. Seth Curry looked really good in game one. I anticipate them leaning on him again. Pretty neutral on FanDuel for me, a little bit higher than the field on DK. I'm treating Kristaps Porzingis like he's fully in. As of right now, he is a mild fade to me. Don't have much on DraftKings. Have a little bit more on FanDuel, but still under the number that we're projecting on FanDuel. Right now, we have Kristaps Porzingis projected for more ownership on FanDuel than Luka Doncic at 10-5. I'm going to have more Luka Doncic, I promise.
Yeah, me too. However, if Porzingis is still questionable heading into lock, that ownership number is going way down. And then I think we get to a point where if Porzingis is going to end up being really contrarian later on in the day, that's where he gets to be more interesting to me because he still has massive upside. And if he's just going to hold on to that questionable tag, which I'm assuming he's playing at this point in time, like I'm not taking him out of my player pool, but if he's going to be questionable as the games keep locking, people are just not going to want to put him into lineups.
Paul George's eligibility on DraftKings is forward, correct? Just forward?
He is, just small forward.
Okay. So if you're using, I'll say this much. If you're making lineups at all, Kristaps Porzingis needs to be in your utility spot. That will allow you to drop from Porzingis straight to Paul George if you need to. Worst case scenario, if that comes in at 845. It's going to be really like if you have Kristaps Porzingis in the center spot on DraftKings, you're going to be in some trouble at 845 if we find out that he's out. So try to leave yourself as much flexibility as possible. And if you can, try to not have Luka there if you're somehow doubling up on those guys. But at least you can drop down from Porzingis to Paul George. Try to leave yourself a second out in that game. That way you can really move these guys around because you don't have many options. You're either dropping to Paul George or then you're taking like a $4,000 haircut. There's no other direction to go.
Yeah, especially because it's the last game of the day. I feel like if you had to put a percentage, Kristaps Porzingis is playing. It's like 98% for me.
Yeah, over 90 for me.
Yeah, so I think it's pretty likely he plays, and I do think that it could cut his ownership a little bit later in the day.
Like if he doesn't play today, I wouldn't be surprised if he's done for the series.
Yeah, there'd be no point, especially because they probably get down 2-0 at that point, and the Clippers are like minus 1,500 or something ridiculous to win the series. There'd be no point at that point.
The Bucks are still minus 10,000 on DraftKings.
Yeah,
so
I have.
It's going to be something along those lines if the Clippers go up 2-0.
Yeah, I'm pretty confident the Clippers win the series. I'm pretty confident the Bucks coming back to win their series also.
You and me both. Just because people are crazy. Is there any way you would go to Boban today?
No. If he's starting and Porzingis is out, which I don't even think he would start if Porzingis is out. I think they would just start Maxi Kleber in that situation. But no, this is...
I think Boban, if Porzingis is out, I think Boban starts. I don't necessarily think that means him viable, but I think they start him for a 6-minute series against Zubac. I think you see him at the beginning of the first quarter and potentially the beginning of the third quarter, and that's it. I don't think he comes back in for other rotations. But if you could eat some Zubac time with Boban, that's your only shot.
Yeah, let's see.
I don't think that he ends up viable. I'd probably project him for like 12 minutes.
It's fun. He started against the Clippers earlier in the bubble and ended up playing 6 minutes that game.
Yeah, and if you were in our premium Slack that night, I said, watch out for just the start against Zubac and then not coming back onto the floor in the second half, and that is exactly what happened. So
fair play.
I was all over that one.
Yeah,
was not all over the second one though.
Boban, not a situation where I'm rostering Boban anyway. But anyway, probably relevant because Kristaps Porzingis, I'm going to say he plays tonight.
Exactly. All right, let's sum this bad boy up. On DraftKings, who do you have your eye on? Favorite plays on DK today?
So overall favorite plays on DK, if I had to go by pricing tiers, it's Luka Doncic at the high end. In the mid-range, Kemba Walker. On the cheaper end, Jordan Clarkson. And Torrey Craig, you've talked me into him.
There we go. All right, for FanDuel, for me, point guard. Favorite 2 point guards going to be Kemba Walker, Jamal Murray. Shooting guards, Luka Doncic, Paul George. Small forward, Kawhi and OG. Special shout out to Dorian Finney-Smith as well. Power forward, probably going to end up being a little different here. Give me Paul Millsap. I do like Jason Tatum, but I think Maxey looks like another guy where you can get a little bit of love over the field. And then at center, I can't go a different direction. I really like Nikola Jokic, but Joel Embiid is my guy. I don't mind the ownership. I'll go over that number. He could actually break the slate at center. So that's where I'm at.
And shouts to Marc Gasol also, because we both liked him a little bit. And center cheap on both sides.
Yeah, 4,500 on FanDuel too. Like, you're changing your entire roster construction between the Joel Embiid, Marc Gasol thing. So you're going to be using Gasol in situations where you're trying to go, Luka plus Kawhi, or, actually that's probably like the biggest one. So Luka plus Kawhi. 212 likes. We got one last shot. 1055 in here. Run it up to 300. Hit that thumbs up. We would love it. And if you've hit it already, don't hit it again, because then we lose one. That's not as fun. We've got a ton of content coming up on this stream. You don't even have to leave. The MLB DFS strategy show will be coming up immediately after that one's over. We're going right back. NBA Live Before Lock at 12:30. We'll have MLB Live Before Lock later tonight. And then PGA Live Before Lock, 8:30 p.m. Eastern for the Northern Trust. Ben Raza and Jason Roslin breaking it all down tonight. Greg, do you got anything else coming out today at Awesemo?
So I've got a building blocks article, I've got a switch and hedge article, and then just everything else. Keep an eye on those injury reports. Look at the ownership projections. Those are going to be, updating throughout the day. And I think that's going to be huge in terms of where does Donovan Mitchell's ownership end up. That's probably like the number one thing that I'm keeping an eye out on. There
we go, guys. Follow us on Twitter. Our names are below our faces. So come check us out. Hit that thumbs up on your way out. Jordan, hit the music. Thanks for joining us and good luck.
Hot mic, son. Had that shirt on yesterday, so go, baby. What's going on, everybody? NBA Live Strategy Show. Thanks to Josh and Greg for leading us into this. I'm Dave Loughran. With me, Adam Scherer. This is the MLB Strategy Show on Wednesday, August 19th, 2020. 11-game slate. Glad to have everyone with us. As always, hanging around after the show, popping in right now to check out some MLB action for the day. Adam, you and I, baby, going back-to-back today. Little MLB, straight into NBA Live Before Lock. This is what you got to do in the COVID era, you know?
Yeah, another fun day of sports, just basically from noon through midnight.
Yeah, exactly. I had a fun day yesterday.
I did not.
Well, here's the thing. Much better in the sports betting space because, well, I got smoked, and we'll get into baseball just a second. Don't worry now. Got smoked on that Milwaukee game. Like, I bet them plus 1.5 in the first half. I'm thinking this is the best bet I've ever made. You know what I mean? Like, how do I lose this? They end up getting trashed, but regained some ground with Miami and Indiana. And then that Lakers-Portland game was a pleasure to watch. It was surprising. You and I will talk so much more about that in the coming hour once we get into Live Before Lock for basketball. But here we are, MLB Strategy Show, 11-game slate. And, for the first time, it feels like in a while, we've got a lot of good pitchers, at least for shows that you and I have done, a lot of good pitchers on the mound today.
Yeah, it has felt like we've talked about a lot of really bad pitching this year, so it'll be a nice change.
Yeah, hold on. Sounded like a plane was just about to crash into my house. I swear to God, that's the craziest thing ever.
That would have gotten a lot of views.
Yeah, you're telling me. Yeah, I would go viral for sure. Anyway, yeah, there's a lot of good pitching. Happy to have everyone with us as always. Before we jump in, I want to say thanks to our sponsor, Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. You guys know what it is. One of the better sites out there, especially if you're trying to play and win legitimate money consistently. You're not chasing $200,000 every day. Maybe you're working with a bit of a smaller bankroll. You want to build that up and then make something of that. There's just a lot of ways that Yahoo Daily Fantasy really helps you enjoy daily fantasy sports a lot more, right? They have CSV uploads and CSV edits now too. If you're someone that is looking to MME on a site outside of DraftKings and FanDuel, and I've said it a million times, but with football coming up, familiarize yourself with the site because they're going to have some monster prize pools. They're probably going to have some overlay. Adam, I remember last year there was some pretty big overlay on the week 1 of NFL. So it never hurts to get comfortable with a site before you jump into the biggest sport they have.
Yeah, definitely. NFL over there last year was great. I enjoyed it a lot. It was really profitable for me and I think a lot of people. So definitely looking forward to that and assume it'll be similar to last year.
For sure. So check it out. Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. Make better decisions. Choose Yahoo Daily Fantasy. And again, like I said, you head over there, get comfortable with it. And also, if you get in early enough in the day, they got some management-free contests, which means everything paid into by the player gets paid back out to the player. The site takes nothing from it. It's a win-win situation. So check it out. Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports, sponsor of the MLB Strategy Show. You ready to dive into this?
Yeah, let's go.
Tampa Bay, New York Yankees, Garrett Cole, Tyler Glasnow. This is a particularly fun matchup to watch and an interesting one to break down from a DFS perspective. Cole and the Yankees minus 186 in the money line, 4.7 implied total for them, 3.4 for the Tampa Bay Rays. Now, we'll talk about Glasnow in just a moment. He's been, 72, 88, 71, 84 pitches, hasn't cracked 90 yet. He's had a tough go of things to start, despite getting a lot of strikeouts. But on the opposite side of the mound, his counterpart, Garrett Cole, has been predictably good again this season, getting a ton of missed bats. The Rays, one of the lowest totals, maybe the lowest total outside of, I think, Miami on the slate. But you will be paying for him, as it would happen with any expensive elite pitcher that throws high 90s and strikes everybody out. So I guess let's kind of break this down in context. You have DeGrom, you have Cole, both of them on this slate, and a couple of other solid guys above that 9K range. What are you doing with Garrett Cole today at $11K, $800 cheaper than DeGrom on DraftKings, as a matter of fact?
Yeah, I mean, I think the price point makes sense. I do think it's worth pointing out that Cole's strikeout numbers this year aren't quite as high as last year. And the reason I think that's at least worth mentioning is that he did obviously switch teams. He went to the Yankees. He has a worse catcher in Gary Sanchez. He may or may not be cheating less than he did in Houston. Obviously we don't know everything that was going on over there. But still good number, still a 30.5% strikeout percentage for Cole. XFIP's at 3.84, which is higher than normal. He has been giving up power with 1.5 home runs per 9, but overall still obviously a really, really good pitcher. It's just that there is plenty of good pitching on this slate. It's an 11-game slate, so there's going to be bats that you want to pay for as well. I wouldn't say in tournaments that he's a must, but obviously if you can get there, it's a nice luxury.
Okay. What about Glass now on the other side? Obviously, a very difficult matchup. The New York Yankees are a team that will, even with players on the IL, will absolutely make you pay from all angles. On the season, they've got the league best WRC plus against righties and almost 700 plate appearances at 129. Their ISO sitting at 213 is also top 5, and 357 weighted on base average. This should come as no surprise to anybody. Leads the league against right-handed arms. What are your thoughts on somebody like Glasnow, who has had some serious hiccups to start the season going into this matchup at Yankee Stadium? Granted, not a ton of lefties, but still a very friendly park if you're batting from the left side of the plate going into this one tonight.
I'm really concerned about Glasnow. I mentioned it before his last start against Boston, but as good as his strikeout stuff is, and it's phenomenal, the knock on him when he was a top prospect with Pittsburgh, and ultimately part of the reason he was available for Tampa Bay in the Chris Archer trade, was his inability to throw strikes throughout the minor leagues, throughout his time in the major leagues. Then he came over to Tampa, and they seemingly fixed that. His walk percentage last year was down around 7% after being in the double digits for all of his time in the majors. This year, through his first 4 starts, he's right back to what he used to do. Last start against Boston was his first of the 4 starts with a walk percentage below 10%, and it was still above 9%. He's faced Atlanta once, Baltimore once, the Yankees once, and Boston once. Atlanta, Baltimore, and Boston are 3 of the hardest teams to walk. They swing at a lot of pitches. They chase pitches out of the zone, and he still managed to do it. The Yankees, on the other hand, have the 7th highest walk percentage this year as a team. In addition to being really, really good hitters. So there is still plenty of strikeout upside for Glasnow, but I'm really concerned about his just inability to throw strikes. And even last game, I mentioned the walk percentage going down. His zone percentage, pitches thrown in the strike zone, or percent of pitches thrown in the strike zone, has decreased every single start, with his lowest being last start, only 36.9% of pitches in the strike zone. So I think there are really legitimate concerns with Glasnow.
Okay, I'm with you here. If his price tag reflected more the matchup and his struggles, I think I'd have maybe a little bit of interest, but there's also ways to get away from this. Now, look, you're right. It is his ability or inability to throw strikes. We've been mentioning this for years now. He's still a high 90s thrower, right? Like, he still has really filthy stuff, but walks and stolen bases have always been a massive issue for him. And ultimately, I think, like you just pointed out everything. I don't even really need to expand upon it. All of those issues to me are highly concerning. So it's probably a good day to stay away from him. Plus, the odds of getting a win here against Garrett Cole are even more difficult. Do you have interest in any bats, however, from the Yankees side of this game?
I think full stacking the Yankees is more appealing than taking one-offs, because Glasnow isn't likely to give up a lot of home runs. He strikes you out or he walks you. But if he's not throwing strikes and doesn't get deep into this game, then you can pile on some runs throughout the game if you get into the weaker part of Tampa Bay's bullpen. If Cole's pitching well and the game's kind of out of hand, and Tampa's not going with their best relievers. So I think there's more upside for a full stack than trying to grab, one guy that homers off Glasnow, because typically if he's in the strike zone, he's not getting hit. So I think full stacks, especially if they're going to be relatively low owned, makes sense.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, Glasnow this season against lefties, he hasn't faced many of them, but he's allowing a lot of them to get on base, which is kind of what we expected. He's striking out a ton of right-handed batters, but man, the power has been a big issue. 313 ISO. It's early in the year, of course, but I stand with you in saying this is a tough spot. Garrett Cole's allowed a home run in each of his 5 starts this year, but that's about all you're going to get is usually a solo shot, maybe a 2-run shot, and then a ton of strikeouts. I have to ask you, just because it's my job, any interest in Tampa Bay bats today?
No.
Okay. Let's talk Pittsburgh and Cleveland. Aaron Savali and Steven Brault. Savali's been good. Been pretty impressive, as a matter of fact, looking at some of his numbers. He's striking lefties out at 26%, righties out at 26%. Been pretty consistent in that range. 11% swinging strike rate. He's solid enough. Gets a lot of ground balls, which is pretty encouraging. At least he has early in the season. But you are going to be paying quite a bit for him against a Pittsburgh team that has undoubtedly struggled early on. You look at them; they can't win a single game, but The thing is with us, we don't really care as much about whether or not they're a good team or not. We care about whether or not they're good for fantasy purposes. And they've got a 53 WRC plus against righties, 247 WOBA, 114 ISO. The numbers across the board are really bad, and they're actually striking out more than I would have initially anticipated. What do you think of him pitching for Cleveland today, the righty against the Pittsburgh Pirates at PNC Park, which is very favorable for pitching?
Yeah, I think he's a decent pitcher. I think that the matchup is good against Pittsburgh, obviously. It's really just a pricing concern for me because even though the strikeouts have been good for him, you're talking about, a 25 to 26% strikeout percentage, and you're really paying a premium for it on a slate where you can pay a little bit more and get, an elite strikeout percentage from someone like Cole or Jacob deGrom, or you can save some money and go to plenty of guys that have similar strikeout rates and are a lot less expensive. So I think it's a really awkward price point. I would assume he doesn't get much ownership because of that, but unless I just have a lineup that I really like and I'm landing like right at 9,800 in salary, I don't really anticipate getting to Savali.
Yeah, if he was like 8,200, I think I would actually be pretty interested in him just because this is one of those matchups that can allow you to coast right through it. Steven Brault on the other side of this one, I can't imagine we'll be spending a whole lot of time on him, but I'll throw it over to you. He hasn't thrown 40 pitches in a single outing this season, so I don't necessarily know what we should expect from him, and I do know that I'm not encouraged by what I've seen.
Yeah, I'm cool with spending zero time on him.
Yeah, okay, sounds good. What about bats, though, against Brault and likely to be a decent collection of bullpen arms for the Pirates?
Yeah, I always like going to Cleveland. They have about a 5 implied run total here. Pricing at the top of the order for Cleveland, specifically Ramirez and Lindor, is expensive. But when you get to the bottom, you get a collection of flawed hitters, but guys that have power. Franmil Reyes, Jordan Luplow, Domingo Santana. I'd be a little bit concerned about Luplow. I think maybe they get a pinch hitter. You get Naquin for him potentially once a right-handed pitcher comes in. But we've seen Reyes and Santana regularly playing against righties, so I think that's less of a concern for them. And then obviously, again, you have the switch hitters in Ramirez, Lindor, Hernandez, Santana. These guys aren't getting pinch hit for, so it doesn't matter. I think Brault's not very good. And then obviously just take your chances with the Pittsburgh bullpen.
4.9 implied run total for Cleveland today. That's pretty high in a park like this. Usually you get up into that 5 range and it's pretty unique. 77 degrees. It's not going to be that hot there at all. No wind or anything like that. So this is strictly just expectedly bad Pittsburgh pitching. So I think Cleveland lands in a pretty decent spot right now. Ownership on them as it stands, it's still pretty early in the morning. They're coming in around 5%. Their top stack probability is actually higher though than their collective ownership. So that's worth considering as well. There's one team on today's slate that has a monster top stack probability, and we'll get to them in a little bit. But first, let's go to New York or go to Miami, where the Mets will be challenging the Miami Marlins, who actually got up to a hot start. They were leading the NL East for a while. Granted, COVID-19 shutting their season down for a bit didn't hurt them in terms of the standings, but they've now lost 4 straight games, and they've got to go up against Jacob deGrom, who I think if you look at some of his starts, like, he's allowed 2 earned in 3 straight starts, but his numbers are almost identical and to some extent better than last season. Specifically, his 18.5% swinging strike rate, Adam. He's striking righties out at 40%, lefties out at 26%. He's getting 50+% ground balls against same-handed bats. Like everything he's doing is once again spectacular, and he's very expensive, but I think we could all come into this one expecting a really great start from Jacob deGrom.
Yeah, completely agree. Everything you mentioned, and then on top of that, he's also averaging an extra 1.5 miles per hour on his fastball. So that's obviously encouraging as well. He's averaged at least 98.2 miles per hour on his fastball in all 4 starts. His most recent start was actually his lowest average velocity at 98.2. But, for comparison, last year he averaged 97.1 or 97.2. So that's come up and should just make him even better. No concerns for me with deGrom. You don't even have the same strikeout concerns that I mentioned with Cole going to the Yankees. So if I can get to deGrom, obviously absolutely love it.
Me too. Great park, great matchup. A Miami team that I think all of us expect to come back down to earth, and that has been the case over the past week. So, all of the stars should align here for DeGrom to come out and have a very solid start. And while the Marlins against righties have a strikeout rate that comes in at 23.5%, it's middle of the league. I would expect it to continue climbing throughout the season, but yeah, Jacob DeGrom, 10 strikeout game across 6 scoreless wouldn't surprise me. Last thing I'll ask you on him though, do you have any concerns about pitch count? Like it feels like he's probably capped in the very low hundreds unless he's having the greatest game ever, which even when he did that against Atlanta to start the season, he got yanked at 72 pitches. I know he's stretched out now, but still.
Yeah, I mean, no real concerns. I mean, who's going out and throwing 120 pitches unless they're Kenta Maeda with a no-hitter?
Right, exactly. What about Pablo Lopez on the other side? He's actually been pretty productive this season. The funny thing, too, is if you look at swinging strike rates from this year, right, everyone's thrown a decent amount of pitches now, so I'm going to start using 2020 data more than I would have even a week ago. He has a 17% swinging strike rate, extraordinarily low xFIP. He's been very good, very, very good against same-handed hitters, especially striking them out at a high clip. He's going to face a good amount of lefties, though. I'm expecting to see around 5 of them today in the Mets lineup. What do you make of somebody like Pablo Lopez? Do you think he's the real deal? Is he getting lucky? Is his price affordable enough to where you'll look at him? What are your thoughts?
I think yes to all of those. I do think he's good. I thought that he had the potential last year to be good, and he's clearly improved this year. I doubt that he's as good as he has been. I doubt that if this were a full season, that at the end of the year, he has a 28.5% strikeout percentage and a sub-3 xFIP. That would surprise me. But I do think he's a good pitcher. And at 7,200, I don't mind going there just kind of betting on the talent, especially if you're playing a bunch of tournament lineups. I don't think you probably should have exposure to Pablo Lopez. But I am, concerned for the reason you said with the lefties in the Mets lineup. For one, the Mets just have a good lineup. They're not a team that I really like picking on because they just have good hitters in this lineup. A nice combination of not striking out and also having power. But then the lefties as well. Last year, Lopez struck out 22% of righties, only about 18.5% of lefties. This year, he's at 20% of lefties, 36% of righties. So you're still seeing that split where he's not striking out lefties nearly as much as righties. And so, yeah, I mean, that concerns me. It keeps him from being like a primary play for me for sure.
Yeah, me too. I am intrigued though. I like what I've seen from Pablo Lopez. I like the park. I don't like that he has to go up against Jacob DeGrom on some sites. That doesn't help you as much, and when it comes to win equity. But I do think he's been quite solid, and he hasn't exactly had the easiest matchups. Baltimore's been smashing opposing offenses. Sure, they come back down to earth. Faced Atlanta, faced the Mets before. It's kind of interesting right now. Pablo Lopez ownership. I'm not sure if you've looked at it, but as I pull it up right now, he is probably like unowned. Yeah, 0.8% ownership. So, it's worth looking into. Not a priority play by any means, but it's definitely an intriguing spot or a guy to keep an eye on. Garrett Cole, 47% on DraftKings, 28% for Jacob DeGrom. So they're separated by quite a bit. What about bats in this one?
If Brandon Nimmo is leading off again, he's still 3,500 on DraftKings. I don't know when that's going to change, but I'll keep rostering him until it does. Outside of that, Conforto's cheap, Cano's cheap. Going to left-handed bats on the Mets is fine. I wouldn't say they're a priority stack, especially if Lopez isn't getting ownership. But Nimmo does look like a really good value at the top.
Washington and Atlanta, Kyle Wright, Eric Fetty. Fun matchup here. 5.6 run implied total for the Atlanta Braves. 5 run even implied total for the Washington Nationals going up against Kyle Wright. It's in Atlanta. This is probably one of those spots where both teams are pretty successful in their run production efforts. It's not to say that Kyle Wright or Eric Fetty are terrible, but first of all, Kyle Wright has looked terrible this season. There's no denying that. He's gone more than 3 1/3 innings in one of 4 outings. He's done a decent job of limiting the long ball at him, but he's just really struggled with walks. Check this out. He has 16 walks in 15 innings. That's an insane number, right? 16 walks in 15 innings. There's simply no way that you can efficiently pitch at the major league level. I don't care what team you're facing if your walk rate is that high. But it also kind of brings things into a clear view when you say, okay, well, he's not allowing home runs, but he's allowing all these runs. Yeah, because he's loading the bases with walks every inning.
Yeah, I've actually been rostering him a decent amount early in the season because he's been cheap, and it's been a miserable experience. You mentioned the walks. It's not even like they're skewed by one start. Yeah, he walked 6 against Miami last time in 3 innings, but the fewest he's walked in any game is 3. And keep in mind, outside of a 6-inning start two starts ago, he hasn't gone more than 3 1/3. So he's just walking an insane amount of guys in every matchup. The Nats, they're not the offense that they were last year, but they're still not a bad offense. Howie Kendrick, I think, could be back today, which would be another decent hitter in the middle of that lineup. But yeah, just not looking to get the pitching in this game. Much rather be getting to the bats. I think that there's some pretty good value here. You have Adam Eaton, who is only 3K on DraftKings. Not an exciting play by any stretch, but only 3K helps you fit in 5,700 Juan Soto. Luis Garcia, one of the top hitting prospects for the Nats, still basically minimum salary on DraftKings at second base. So it's a team that you'll be able to stack pretty affordably, even if you go to obviously the best hitters or the best plays in Soto and Turner.
So another thing too is Wright's already allowed 4 stolen bases. Definitely having speed on the base paths. If it's somebody that walks a lot of batters and hasn't given up a ton of power, that's something I'm interested in for sure, Adam. So you just ran through the Washington guys, but I would definitely consider, if you're on the fence about this player or that player in a Washington stack or one-offs, I really do think that having speed is going to really benefit you if Kyle Wright's command is lost, but he's not putting pitches in a spot where you can hit them deep. So like a Trey Turner to me specifically really makes a lot of sense.
Yes. A walk for Trey Turner is probably worth more than a double.
Right. I call them Billy Hamilton home runs, right? Where they just go walk, stolen base, run scored. That's the same amount of points as a solo shot. And I think there's no doubt that Turner could do something like that in this spot. So keep that in mind. Sometimes guys like Kyle Wright can be not the type of pitcher you want to go up against or you want to be running guys out against in DFS formats because straight power guys are just going to walk. Like a Bryce Harper, this could just be an instance where, okay, he walks twice and then Kyle Wright's gone. But having speed kind of mitigates that and cushions the blow in the event that you're just getting free passes issued. Anything else on the other side of this one?
Yeah, I don't think Eric Fetty's any good either.
He's looked really bad.
Yeah, since last year, he's struck out a huge 12.5% of righties, 10% of lefties. And now you get an Atlanta team that has plenty of power. Obviously it is a watered down lineup without Acuna. But you still have Ozuna, you still have Freeman, Swanson can hit. Travis d'Arnaud has been one of the most popular plays the last couple of days for good reason. He's been batting third for Atlanta. He's been really cheap, and obviously he's a catcher. So I think, mixing and matching some of these guys, looking for one-offs to take Fetty deep is a good idea. Freeman stands out, d'Arnaud because of his price. And then if you're just looking for a really contrarian play or lower owned play that has a lot of power, I'd look to Austin Riley towards the bottom.
And by the way, I should clarify, when I say really bad, I mean his swing and miss stuff is just pitiful. His strikeout rate's like 6%, 6%. He has a swing and strike rate. It's the lowest on the slate. Negative K minus BB rate against lefties. Like these are some really bad numbers. A 0.0 K minus BB rate against righties. There's just absolutely no swing and miss stuff here. He might limit runs, but he's going to put balls in play. There's no doubt about that. And to me, I think that's pretty appealing. You want to move on?
Yep.
All right. Detroit, Chicago White Sox. Interesting one. Two former first round picks here, right? Dane Dunning coming up for the Chicago White Sox. He was a first round pick. And then Casey Myers, the exciting one here, first overall pick in 2018. He hasn't pitched above AA, but he's being brought up to pitch today. Really interesting stuff. Like prospects have said that this guy could potentially have 4+ pitches. And he's been compared to guys like Garrett Cole. He's not somebody that is going to have one of the best single pitches in the league, right? You look at a bunch of guys and you say, okay, Jacob deGrom, what you got? Oh, he's got maybe the best four-seam fastball in the entire league. or an elite slider from somebody, an elite curveball. In this case, they're saying that he profiles as someone that could legitimately have 4+ pitches, Adam. And at AA, his strikeout stuff wasn't like ridiculously filthy, but he has amazing control, great command. And the Tigers, who at one point had, Scherzer, Verlander, Price, Porcello in his prime. They had a nasty, nasty rotation. They're trying to build this back, and it all starts with Casey Mize. So a lot of eyes are going to be on him today.
Yeah, and I think, for good reason. The number one overall pick, he hasn't pitched above AA, like you said, but pretty solid numbers there, 23.5% strikeout percentage, multiple plus pitches, as you said. There's clearly unknowns here. It's his first major league start. He hasn't pitched above AA. The White Sox are a good offense, all of that, but he's cheap or relatively inexpensive. You're not the biggest thing for me is that right now we don't have him projected for much ownership. So I think typically just a good rule of thumb in tournaments is that when you have a huge question mark like this, where the guy's talented, but you have no idea really what to expect, if nobody else is going there, it's usually a good idea to go there. And if he's popular, then it's a good idea to just to stay away and hope he doesn't have a great first start. So I do definitely have interest in him in large field tournaments, unless we get word that he's on like a strict pitch count.
Okay, so do I. I just think that price, it's at a point where if there's someone that profiles this good, that simply has the pedigree, I'm willing to get there. Earlier in the season, you and I had a long discussion about Dylan Cease, right? And his first start was pretty heinous. And I remember you DMing me and you're like, look at this. And he can't hit the strike zone. It's brutal. And then his next start looked better. Then he went 5 scoreless. Then he went 6 innings, 1 earned, although he gave up 5 runs, struck out 5. Strikeouts haven't necessarily been there, but he's a guy that has pedigree that I'm willing to look at. If I'm getting somebody like Mize at 6,900, I'm definitely intrigued. Now, on the contrary, and then I'll get into Dane Dunning in a second, but I want to kind of go in order here. Do you think that we should also be considering White Sox bats against the pitcher that, yes, one of the most elite prospects in the league right now, but the White Sox have absolutely elite hitting from top to bottom. They've been spectacular. And this guy's never pitched above AA.
Yeah, definitely. Especially if the ownership.
They do have a 5-run total, by the way.
Yeah. Healthy implied run total, 11-game slate. So I doubt the ownership really gets out of control, especially because you have, cores back on the slate now. So yeah, I think that this is a spot where if you're playing a bunch of lineups, you could very easily go to both sides because there's just so much unknown about Casey Mize at the big league level at this point, obviously. So he's facing a bunch of really good hitters. Luis Robert may not be in the lineup, which would be disappointing, but still a ton of power, a lot of speed too for the White Sox. So yeah, I think it's a spot where there's upside on both sides here.
Okay. What about Dane Dunning? I did a little looking into this fella, and there's not a ton on him because he's a first-round pick, but he doesn't have the same pedigree as somebody like Mize. He was the 29th overall pick back in 2016. He is somebody, however, that is pretty proficient in getting strikeouts. I think it was a couple of years, well, really all of these years, he's put up really, really solid strikeout numbers. And now he goes up against the Detroit team that's almost certainly going to come back down to earth at the plate, especially. He is weighing in at what does he cost? My fault. Dane Dunning, 4,500. I have to ask you about him just because he's dirt cheap and he's priced like the worst pitcher in the league.
Yeah, I think, he's getting a lot of ownership, but I think that's for good reason. I haven't seen anything about him being limited here. I still don't believe the Tigers are a very good offense.
My only concern is he missed all of 2019 with Tommy John.
Right. Yeah. So, I'm not expecting, 120 pitches or something, or 100, even 100 pitches, but unless we get, that he's throwing 60 pitches or 4 innings or something, if we assume that he can give you 5-6 innings, the strikeout stuff was good in the minors. He was part of the terrible Adam Eaton trade that the Nats made.
Oh my God. I was revisiting that today. I could not believe what I was seeing. I totally forgot about that.
Yeah. What was it? Lopez, Dunning, and someone else.
Wasn't Kopesh in it too?
No, that was the sale trade.
Was that the sale trade? Moncada?
No,
that was also the sale trade.
Yeah. The Nats gave up one other piece too. Oh, Giolito.
Thank you. Yeah, Giolito. Yeah, it was bad.
Yeah, so he was a piece of that. Obviously, the last one to make it to the majors. But yeah, I mean, the strikeout stuff's there. It's basically the negatives are the same negatives we just said about Casey Mize. He hasn't pitched above Double-A. We have no idea what to expect at this level, but he's like half the price.
Right, exactly.
Or 2/3 of the price. I don't know. I can't do math.
Yeah, it'd be about 2/3. Yeah, I'm on board with it. He's going to get ownership, but how limited is he actually going to be? I don't know. Hell, if you got 5 innings from him, you'd be pretty happy. And like I said, I'm certainly not sold on the Detroit Tigers. How about bats from the Tigers, though? While we may not think that they're going to keep this up over the course of the season, as far as hitting is gone, and also just to throw this out there, they've been much better against lefties than they have against righties, which is definitely something to keep in mind. Do you think that bats here for the Tigers make sense, knowing that Dunning's getting that type of ownership and Detroit bats are getting around 2% aggregate?
Yeah, especially in big tournaments. The one thing I would keep an eye on here, because the reason that I think the Tigers are appealing is twofold. For one, you're just leveraging against a really big question mark that is projected for a lot of ownership. But also they're really cheap. So you would be able to get a build where not only are you leveraging against Dunning, but you're able to get to 2 really good pitchers if you want to, or to DeGrom plus really good one-offs. The one thing to keep an eye on, though, is that they are really cheap, the Tigers are. So it wouldn't be surprising if the ownership comes up throughout the day as optimizers kind of do exactly what I just said and give you Tiger stacks with really good pitching. Definitely not a team that I'd want to be on if like a relatively high percentage of the field is going there, because I don't think they're a high probability team.
Mike says, don't you think Dunning will be limited? Or he said, I doubt Dunning goes past 55, 60 pitches. I don't know. That's the thing. Like, is it just because of the missing the last season? He's had a pretty long time to recover. So
yeah, I mean, it's not like these guys. It's not like he's just been like sitting in the dugout for the first month of the season. Like he's been at the minor league site or whatever.
Yeah,
he's been throwing. Unless we get word that he's strictly limited, I just assume that he's at least able to go like 80 something pitches.
I've looked and I didn't see anything. So I don't know. I can't. I'm not going to make an assumption on that. He's $4,500. Want to talk about Milwaukee, Minnesota? Or is there anything else on this one?
I think that covers that one.
Okay. Hey, by the way, if you guys have been watching the past couple of days, then you already know about this. You have no excuse not to do it. It is certainly not baseball, but it is basketball. And I know most of you guys like basketball as well. We're giving away Awesemo Plus weekly passes for $8.24. It's 50% off. It's 50% off the normal price. If you've ever been wondering what the NBA product looks like, you hear us talk about ownership and player projections and the boom or bust tool and everything, including all the premium articles, the lineup builder, everything that we have to offer, all the tools that were developed and used by Alex Baker himself, Awesemo, who is currently at the DraftKings Live final right now because he's just really good at DFS and uses these tools to get there. Well, here's how you can get that for $8.24 for the week. That's like the price of one number one at McDonald's. Might even be less expensive, except the number one at McDonald's gives you heart disease. This gives you a bigger bank account. That's pretty good, right? I just came up with that right now.
Yeah, excellent. I also liked how you mentioned that Alex is at the live final, like he's not in his apartment.
Yes, I'm sorry. He's sweating the live, the virtual live final. Right. Very good call. Point being, he's there. It's a habit, But $8.24. The reason it's $8.24 and the reason it expires on $8.24, August 24th, is because the code at checkout is Mamba, MAMBA, like Kobe Bryant. 50% off everything. Like I said, all of the tools. Number one ranked DFS player in the world created these tools, and he uses them to become that player. So check it out. It's $8.24. It's Awesemo Plus weekly pass for NBA. Normally, I'd say that for the NBA show, but I feel like it's worth throwing out here because even if you're mostly MLB and you only dabble in NBA, there's nothing to lose jumping in on this for the week. If you don't like it, you will. But if you don't like it, well, really, no harm, no foul. We will, see you back on the next go around. So check that out. Mamba at checkout, $8.24 for a full week of Awesemo Plus NBA content, everything. All right. So Milwaukee and Minnesota, Rich Hill, Brett Anderson, battle of the lefties for this one, Adam. Rich Hill went 5 scoreless with 2 strikeouts in his first start. And can you see, this was strange to me. Rich Hill actually hit the injured list after his first start. Shocking.
Yeah, really, really surprising. Left shoulder fatigue. So yeah.
He's always hurt, man.
And remember, he was pushed back.
Yeah.
Because I don't really know what reason. And then he went to so he threw 68 pitches in his first start, spent three turns through the rotation on the injured list. Now he's back after a 60 pitch bullpen session. I can't imagine he's throwing tons of pitches here. I doubt that he's throwing enough pitches to really be a relevant play at 7,400. So not interested there. Maybe you could talk me into some Brewer stacks, just hoping that Rich Hill looks terrible, but mostly just not too interested in anything from that side. And then Brett Anderson, one of the lowest strikeout percentages for starting pitchers, going up against a Twins team that has tons of offense or tons of power and doesn't really strike out that much anyway. So mostly interested in Minnesota bats here. Definitely could see getting to like some Keston Hero one-offs from the Milwaukee side.
Okay. The funny thing about Rich Hill is whenever he pitches, he's usually quite good.
Yeah.
But you just can't rely on it. So I'm with you here. I don't see him going more than 70, maybe 75 pitches. So I stand on your side with this one. On the other side, Brett Anderson, you just spelled it out. You're not going to get strikeouts with him. Like, he's not Eric Fetty bad as far as missing bats goes, but I'd rather, like, would you rather have a $6,900 Casey Mize or Brett Anderson at $6,800?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. It was like you have between 7K and 6,700. You have Taijuan Walker against the Dodgers, Casey Mize against the White Sox, Anderson and Kyle Wright. That's kind of why I think Mize out of that group stands out.
Yep, for sure. 5.3 run implied total for the Twins, 4.3 for the Brewers, going up against the Southpaw and Rich Hill. What are we doing with bats here? Anything stand out to you, appeal to you on either side of this game? As it stands right now, Milwaukee is getting about 5% ownership. Minnesota is getting like 4% ownership. And both of them have pretty similar top stack probabilities.
Yeah, I mean, I think Garver will be a nice play, like as a pivot to Travis d'Arnaud. I think Garver does get ownership since it's a righty-lefty matchup and he'll be a catcher at the top of the order. But I think that d'Arnaud is so cheap, he'll get a lot of ownership. So Garver gives you a nice tournament pivot there. Nelson Cruz, of course, will get ownership in this spot, deservedly so. Those two stand out. I think Sano individually looks really good as well. But full stacking Minnesota, I think, is a really good play here. We have them right now only projected for a 4.4 top stack percentage because Anderson does typically do a good job of keeping the ball on the ground, but we also only have them projected for about 4% aggregate ownership. So I think it looks like a good spot to get to the Twins.
Okay. So I'm looking at this next game, right? And you've got Houston and Colorado. You've got Framber Valdez, who has been solid this year, striking out more than a batter per inning, done a phenomenal job of limiting runs and the long ball. He's gone 6+ frames in each of his last 3 starts. Now he's at Coors Field against Ryan Castellani. I feel like despite how good he's been, you're paying $8,300 for him here. We know that pitch mix plays a large role in how a certain pitcher will perform at a place like Coors Field, right? And it still doesn't guarantee a damn thing. Framber Valdez, in this case, throws the sinker 60%, curveball 30%, and then that changeup about 10% of the time. He doesn't have a slider, which usually plays much better at Coors. You're not worried about that altitude preventing break on the curveball. I guess it depends on what his curve looks like. If it's a sweeping curve, then it's a little bit different. But what are you doing with pitching in this one, if anything? And if not, we can go straight to hitters.
Yeah, I think we can go right to the bats. Castellani, decent or supposedly was improving his strikeout numbers in the minors before he was injured. But you're just not going to him against the Astros in Coors, and then you're not getting any sort of discount really on Framber Valdez. The Rockies clearly a flawed lineup, and he's not a bad pitcher, but I just don't see the need to go to Coors pitching on this particular slate.
Okay, so The totals in this game for both teams, 5.7 for the Rockies, 6.9 for the Houston Astros. Here's where it gets interesting. Astros stack ownership is 20%. Their top stack probability is 23.3%. The next closest team is the Dodgers at 9%. So this is one of those instances where, like, even if Houston is popular, they are still popping as, easily the best stack on this slate. The biggest question is, how are we going to fit them in? And what's this lineup going to look like, right? Alvarez, Brantley on the injured list. George Springer is day to day. That's worth monitoring. They've got a few players right now that are banged up, and this lineup's going to continue to look a little bit different. It should be mostly what we expect if George Springer's in it. If he's out, it's definitely going to look different.
Yeah, I mean, Kyle Tucker at 4,500, if he moves up in the order, obviously looks like a great value. I think as far as the stack ownership, it's worth pointing out that, obviously we talk a lot about teams being under-owned versus over-owned, and normally that's really important. At 20% ownership, that's still 20% ownership. Like that's still a ton.
Yeah.
Let's say, if you have 30,000 teams in this tournament and you assume everyone's stacking, which obviously they aren't, but that's still 6,000 Houston stacks that you're competing with, even if they are quote unquote under owned. So, I think that is something to keep in mind when aggregate ownership does get that high, especially on an 11 game slate. It's still, a 1 in 5 chance that some team other than Houston is the top scoring stack, and that, you don't need them to win. So they're obviously a really good stack. You definitely, if you stack them, want to be contrarian, either a pitcher or with your secondary stacks or one-offs. But, that's still just a ton of ownership going to one team on a 22 game slate or 22 team slate.
So what do you see as being a solid alternative here?
As far as, teams?
Yeah.
I mean, Minnesota obviously has a really, really high ceiling. The Rockies on the other side of this game, nowhere near as appealing a matchup, but same ballpark. One of the main reason the Astros are getting so much ownership, the Rockies are at almost 6%. So 1/3 of the ownership. I think that's a spot that looks really good, even though Houston is in the better spot.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the Rockies bats here. Like I said, Valdez has been very good. Take nothing away from the guy. He's pitched extraordinarily well early on in the season. It's not a huge surprise. He had shown flashes for sure in previous seasons with the Houston Astros. He's not a guy that's going to miss a ton of bats. He's got a single-digit swinging strike rate, just a tick below 10%. But he gets a good amount of ground balls. He prevents a ton of hard contact and line drives. Does this still seem like a spot where he can get blown up just given the conditions and the atmosphere at Coors?
Yeah, it's not that I think it's particularly likely. He's a good pitcher. The Rockies lineup isn't that great. Obviously, Story and Arenado are good right-handed bats, but outside of that, Garrett Hampson, Matt Kemp, Chris Owings, Drew Butera, you're not really concerned about these right-handed bats from the Rockies outside of Story and Arenado, but it's just, a probability thing. I mean, he's still pitching in Coors. I think that you could certainly use other teams to pivot off of the Astros, but just the main reason that the Astros are getting so much ownership is the ballpark. And so going to the much lower owned team in this ballpark and just hoping that, Valdez doesn't have it that day, I think is a profitable move.
Okay. Yeah, I think you're right. Man, Houston's going to be tough to get away from, but they're also extraordinarily expensive. I can't help but look at some of these other teams that might be cheaper pivots and allow you to get up to some pitchers that are more appealing. Like Dane Dunning's ownership is going to be so high because of Coors Field.
Right. I mean, you're like, what percent? This is the other thing. You're talking about how at some point just the raw ownership does matter. What percentage of all those Astros stacks are going to be some 5 Astros, Chris Paddock at 7,700, Dane Dunning at 4,500, and then whatever else fits? Like you're just competing with so many of the same lineups in these large field tournaments by going there with that build.
You're right. Let's talk about Texas and San Diego then. Lance Lynn's been very good this season. He's always, oddly enough, been someone that has pitched better at home, and not oddly enough, predictably actually been very, very, very good against right-handed bats. That goes all the way back to the start of his career. He's striking righties and lefties out at 40 or at 30% this season. He's actually walking same-handed batters more and has a higher xFIP, but that's not something I'm particularly concerned about. 12% swinging strikes for Lance Lynn as well. He's pretty much doing everything well. And, since he improved his fastball, he just became so much better of a pitcher. And you're seeing it every time he goes out. I think there are very few things to say bad about him. He's upped his fastball usage over the last 2 years by like 10 to 15%. And then he just mixes in a ton of other pitches. He throws like 6 pitches or something like that. But all in all, he can miss bats, not at an elite clip, but his command has been spectacular. Now he's got San Diego. And the one thing that was a little bit strange to me, Adam, and it is showing in ownership, he is getting a decent amount, but not a crazy amount. I actually thought compared to some other pitchers on this slate that Lance Lynn would be more expensive than 9,200.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I do like him here. The Padres obviously have a good offense, but there's a couple things to really like. For one, the most dangerous hitters on San Diego, you're talking about Tatis, Machado, both right-handed. Will Myers right-handed as well. They have lefties that can hit too with Grisham and Hosmer. Cronenworth's been pretty decent this year. But Tatis is right-handed, Machado's right-handed. So that's really important. Lynn has been great against righties throughout his career, like you said. This year he struck out 30% with a 107 expected ISO. But also he used to struggle with lefties. Last year he did a much better job at limiting power to them. He started throwing a cut fastball more frequently. He threw it about 15% of the time. And he still only struck out 21% of lefties, but he held them to a 148 expected ISO. This year to lefties, he's throwing that cutter about 24% of the time. He's held them to a 111 expected ISO, and the strikeout percentage has jumped to 30%. So obviously we're talking about a few starts, and that probably does come down a bit towards where he was last year. But I think it's reasonable to expect that he strikes out a higher percentage of lefties this year than he did last year, and that he's even more successful against them than he was. So I think that he's just a really good pitcher. He's in a park where you're not expecting it to benefit bats. The weather should be fine for pitching. So I think Lynn looks like a good option.
It's funny because the Rangers are plus 124 in this game, 4.3 run implied total for the Padres. It seems like Lynn's still not getting all of the respect he deserves, but a 3.8 implied total for the Texas Rangers against Chris Paddock, who is $7,700 on DraftKings. He's threw 52 pitches last time out against the Dodgers, got shit on from the early goings of that start, didn't last long, but he threw 95 pitches his last time out before that. He has allowed some runs, and it's been slightly problematic. There's no denying that. But at the same time, the Rangers have been just an absolutely horrid offense this season. Not many things have gone right for him. Paddock does have a double-digit swinging strike rate, but it's right on the border of 10%. I guess the question, Adam, is which one wins out here? Someone in Paddock who has definitely struggled and gets some strikeouts, but hasn't been spectacular and has got blown up in a couple of outings this season, or the Texas Rangers, who pretty much every time out have really struggled this year, don't strike out a ton, but have a dismal 72 WRC plus against right-handed pitching.
Yeah, I'll go to Paddock here. For one, he hasn't had the easiest matchups this year. He's had 5 starts, 2 against the Dodgers, who obviously are a tough matchup, 2 against Arizona, who aren't the same level of offense as the Dodgers, but still have pretty solid hitting in their lineup. But also Paddock's salary just really factors in any struggles that he's had. Last year, he had a much higher strikeout percentage against righties than lefties, 30% to righties, 24 to lefties. This year, he's at 26% to righties, only 18% to lefties. But he really isn't someone that should struggle with left-handed hitters. He does have a good changeup that can get swings and misses. The Rangers should have a pretty balanced lineup, and they're not very good, like you said. But also, at the salary for Paddock, I think it's important to keep in mind that he really doesn't walk hitters. He throws a lot of strikes, only a 3.8% walk percentage this year, which is exceptionally low. And at 7,700, just throwing strikes and getting in and out of innings, assuming he doesn't get unlucky or get lit up again in terms of home runs, just getting those 6 innings with, let's say 4 or 5 strikeouts is perfectly fine for his price point. So I think that he's just too cheap. The matchup's good. He's going to get a lot of ownership, and he has struggled a bit, but I'm not too concerned about the struggles, and I think the salary makes up for it.
I don't disagree, but let me flip this, play devil's advocate for a moment. If he is going to be this popular, and right now he's getting an immense amount of ownership, 39% projected ownership on DraftKings, that is really significant. Now, if you come over and look at a site like FanDuel, he's still 15% on a single pitcher site. Not crazy, but it's a decent amount given the price discrepancy and knowing that there's only one pitcher. And then on Yahoo, sponsor of the strategy show, he's 31.5%. He's allowing 2.45 home runs per 9 this season. He's already coughed up 7 home runs across 25 and 2/3 innings. Can we make the argument that a low-owned Texas stack actually makes quite a bit of sense, knowing that they're coming in with virtually no ownership at all, or have they been so bad that you're not even willing to entertain this notion?
No, I mean, I don't think it's a bad idea just because, again, Paddock is getting so much ownership. And I do think it's worth pointing out that he probably doesn't deserve quite as much as he's getting by his own terms. It's that there's nothing around him in terms of salary. Like the pitching around him, you have Luzardo against Arizona, you have Valdez in Colorado, you have Hill coming off the injured list, you have Lopez against the Mets. He's kind of at like a dead price point. So while he's clearly too cheap, you're also just getting inflated ownership because people are just going to land there in their builds. So, I think that, again, it kind of comes down to what strategies you play in tournaments. The Rangers are an extremely low probability play here, I think, relative to, 21 other teams on the slate. And so your chances of cashing those lineups are pretty low, but it does give you that ability to, hit first place, obviously, if you're killing 30% of the field. It's not like, we've talked about this a lot. The Rangers aren't going to be this bad all season long, at least not the top part of this order, True through Gallo. Odor has power. Frazier has some power. So it's not like it's a lineup with no upside. So, I can see what you're saying. I don't know that on a 22-team slate I would get to it, but I'm sure there are going to be some good players that go to Texas because of how contrarian they play.
I think you'll see that as well. It's just Paddock, like you're right about a bunch in the sense that he's faced some really tough teams, and he's faced them multiple times, and a couple of teams that don't really strike out. But if there are some struggles here and the home runs are a real thing, you're pretty much, God, if you look at the prices on Texas, they are so cheap. They have one player in the entire lineup, and granted, they have not played well. One player in the entire lineup above $3,600 on DraftKings, Adam. That's nuts.
Yeah, it's nice too, because not only are you getting leverage against Paddock, but you're getting to a different price point in pitcher, which is good. So again, if this were a smaller slate, I'd be more interested, but I do think the idea at least makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, I wonder if I could play DeGrom and Cole. Yeah, you could play DeGrom and Cole and full stack the Rangers. So
including Gallo.
Yeah. You have $3,400 remaining for the rest of your lineup, and Joey Gallo makes that $3,257. But if you look at the prices of the Rangers that are projected to be in this lineup, 29, 33, 35, 35, 36, 32. I'm not saying they're good. Don't get me wrong, but who knows if DeGrom and I know hitting usually wins tournaments, but it's at least worth looking into. Maybe you play around with that and find something you like. You want to move on?
And it's not like there aren't some cheap one-offs you can go to also. I mean, we already talked about Darno at 3,500, right. Garcia's at 2,300, and Nimmo's at 3,500. So yeah, you can definitely make that work.
Yeah, it's doable. And even if you wanted to go like DeGrom and Lance Lynn or another one of these guys, it opens it up a little bit, but it's actually possible. That's the only reason I think Texas actually has some appeal given Paddock's home run issues.
Yeah. And kind of to take a step back too, even if it's not Texas, I do think what you're saying is a good way to approach tournaments today, because with Paddock being like that one pitcher in the mid-range that has a high probability, it's different when you're talking about there being like 3 really good arms in that price range, because it's unlikely that all 3 of them fail. It's not really that unlikely that one pitcher, whoever it is in whatever matchup, is disappointing or relatively disappointing. And so if you're just building differently, by using more expensive pitching, for example, and not going the Paddock Dunning route, you're going to be contrarian kind of regardless of what teams you're playing for the most part.
No question. Hit that thumbs up if you guys haven't done so yet. If you're coming into the show, just spontaneously welcome. If you were hanging out after NBA, you already hit thumbs up. Well, thank you. If you haven't, do that for us. It's the easiest way to help support us. Subscribe, hit that notification bell as well. It does big things. It allows us to keep putting out free content like this on YouTube for the Awesemo site. Arizona, Merrill Kelly, Oakland, Jesus Luzardo. Pretty good strikeout stuff for that guy, but we'll start it off with Merrill Kelly against the Oakland A's. Right now, you've got the A's with a 4.8 implied total, 3.8 for the Arizona Diamondbacks. Going to be fun getting to Luzardo and having that conversation. But first, right-handed Merrill Kelly. He was sitting on that no-hitter earlier in the year, went 7 2/3, ended up coming not undone, but giving up 1 run on a homer. I would believe it was his first start of the season against, no surprise, the Texas Rangers. But he's gone 6+ innings in every single start this year, Adam. Pretty interesting guy.
Yeah, if he ever ends up being a good major league pitcher, I'll lose a lot of money because I just refuse to consider him, basically.
I know we've had a lot of conversations about this guy,
especially at this price point. I mean, Oakland does have strikeouts in their lineup, but
was he the one that was he the one that we couldn't get past the fact that all of his outs were to the warning track? You remember that? Was it him or was it?
There was Matt Cook, I think.
It was. You're right. It was Matt Cook, where every single out was to the warning track, and people would be like, "No, but he's good."
Yeah, someone in Slack made the argument that it's a skill to get line drives blasted at your shortstop.
That's right. That's right. Sorry,
he's pitching to his defense.
Matt Cook. He's getting roped at their head. He's so good at that.
His shortstop is literally in danger.
Yeah, he trained that way. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, Kelly's just not a high strikeout guy. He'd be more interesting. Like, if he were the same price as Chris Paddock, it would be kind of interesting as a pivot. But he's not. He's $2,000 more expensive than Chris Paddock. So I don't really see it. I think that, he has been solid this year, and he hasn't had the easiest matchups. Outside of that Texas start that you mentioned, he's faced the Padres twice, and he's faced the Dodgers. The only poor start he had was against the Dodgers, and he still went 6 innings. So, all that's good, but I still just, the strikeouts aren't there. Even just looking at this year, 22% to righties, 21 to lefties. There's a lot of power in Oakland's lineup. They have a 4.8 implied run total right now. If I'm doing anything, I think I would rather be going to the Oakland Bats. Kelly's not getting any ownership, so that's not anything to talk about. But about a 4% top stack percentage for Oakland. Their ownership coming in around that same spot. Going back to last season, Kelly's allowed a 216 expected ISO to righties, to lefties, 238 to righties. This year, 197 to righties, 258 to lefties. So he does allow some power. Looking to like a Matt Chapman or a Matt Olson, I think is good.
What do you think of Luzardo? This guy sits around 96, 97. He touches 100, 99, 100. Some pretty interesting stuff. I think, given the changeup and the curve, both pitches that right now are getting pretty high whiff rate, and a 4-seam fastball that's got a whiff rate coming in around 14%. That's close to Jacob deGrom numbers this season. Is he intriguing to you at a price point that sits above 8K against the Arizona Diamondbacks, who, like I mentioned, 3.8 run implied total, very, very low, but the left-handed Luzardo has looked extremely potent.
If ownership stays how it is, then yes, I think he's a lower probability play than Paddock, but he's getting about 1/5 the ownership, and he's like the one guy at this price point that I think you can pivot to. I'm just not interested in going to like Valdez over Paddock or Rich Hill over Paddock. But we have 9% ownership going to Luzardo, we have 39 going to Paddock, and so he's like the one guy that I think still gives you that ceiling that Paddock does, and lets you keep the builds that are going to be really good, with this cheap or mid-range pitching, but just get a lot lower ownership. So I do think Luzardo has a role from that standpoint. It's not a great matchup against the Diamondbacks, but they do only have a 3.8 implied run total. Luzardo does have really good stuff. It's favorable pitching conditions in Oakland. So all that I think is working for him and makes him a pretty appealing tournament target if you're looking to get away from Paddock.
With that in mind, do you have any interest in bats? I saw a chat talking about Nick Ahmed. He's cheap. You got him batting 9th in Oakland at the Coliseum. Anybody intrigue you from either side?
I like Matt Chapman and Matt Olson. Kevin Cron is only 2K on DraftKings. I'm pulling he's got insane power. So that's a really weird price point. Don't know where he'll be in the lineup or if he'll be in the lineup, but if he's in there, I mean, Steamer projects him for a 233 ISO. Granted, he plays in the PCL, but he had a 446 ISO at AAA last year, 310 once he came up in 39 games with the Diamondbacks. Guys like that just shouldn't be $2,000.
CJ Cron's brother, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I'm not surprised that he has immense power. Both of them against lefties really hit well. They're all cheap. There's that, but I don't know how much further I'd go past that. Ownership right now on both of these teams. Oakland is at 4%. So, it's not crazy low. It's right kind of in the middle of the pack, a little higher actually. Arizona at 2%. So they're not really getting much. And a lot of teams aren't going to get much because you have Coors Field and then you have Atlanta and Washington that are hauling in 10+% each. So let's talk about Seattle and the Dodgers. Julio Urias and Taijuan Walker. The Dodgers with a 5.5 run total against Walker, 3.6 for the Seattle Mariners. That should not be too surprising. Favorable pitcher park, a quality lefty who, when he's not injured, is pitching quite well. What do you make of the pitching matchup on both sides?
I'm kind of surprised that Urias isn't getting more ownership. I mean, I guess it makes sense because of the builds and because he is relatively expensive, but we only have him projected for 4% ownership. Seattle only a 3.6 implied run total. Again, another city where you're not expecting it to be hot and humid today. So he's another guy that I think you could look to in tournaments if you're playing a more popular stack as a pivot to the pitchers that are just drawing a ton of ownership here. He doesn't have the same strikeout stuff as the guys at the top, but he is still a really good pitcher, and I think that it's not a bad matchup for him. So I do have some interest in Urias. Don't have interest in Taijuan Walker here. We kind of talked about at the beginning of the year that we needed to wait and see because there was at least some non-zero chance that Taijuan Walker was going to come back and be really, really good after this long layoff. That has definitely not been the case. He's done a good job suppressing power so far over a very limited sample. His expected ISO is low to both sides of the plate, but not striking anyone out. And facing the Dodgers typically can raise your ISO number pretty quickly.
What about bats here?
Dodgers. Just give me the
Ton
Dodgers.
Of Dodgers.
Yeah, I mean, they're another team where if all that ownership is going to the Astros, we have the Dodgers as the second highest top stack percentage at 9%, which it's a lot lower than Houston, but we have about 8% ownership going there. So 2.5 times that ownership is going to Houston. Just in terms of raw numbers, you have a better path to winning by going to the Dodgers.
You're right. That's a huge difference. And they're just such a good team that no matter who they're facing, especially Taijuan Walker, to be specific, it is a pretty favorable opportunity. Hopefully they hit for the long ball here. It's not a park that you're particularly impressed with, but and Walker's been okay. His strikeout stuff's been hit or miss. Outside of that, though, like you said, just a very high total here. Dodgers not getting nearly as much love as they should be. If it wasn't a core slate, they'd probably be one of the highest owned stacks on this slate. You ready to close this out with the Angels and Giants?
Yep.
All right, Pablo Sandoval. And by the way, stick around. Live Before Lock NBA coming up next. Adam and I take a few-minute break, come back at 12:30, bring you up to 1:30 p.m. Eastern time, get you ready for a 4-game basketball slate. We've got a whole lot more coming up throughout the day as well. So you know where to be. Preeminent site, preeminent spot for all of your DFS information, whether it's free on here or whether you want to check out what we've got at awesemo.com/join, where you can get any type of content you want, premium, all of them developed tools by the best player in the world, Awesemo himself, Alex Baker. You know it. We've got it all. MMA, MLB, NBA, NFL, WNBA, like we had KBO, league, like anything. If they have contests for it across the industry, we've got content. We've got the best stuff out there, the best ownership, the best projections, the best tools, lineup builder, all the best premium articles. And you can find the tutorials to use all these, but also testimonials of people showing what awesemo.com has done for them. So go to awesemo.com/join. Check it all out. We've got weekly, express weekly, monthly, annually, whatever is best suited for you. We've got something for you to make it much easier on you so you're not just diving in head first and you feel comfortable doing so. Awesemo.com/join with Pablo Sandoval. Sorry, I do that every single time. Patrick Sandoval and Johnny Cueto at Oracle Park. I always want to say AT&T Park. 4.2 run implied total for the Giants. 4.9 for the LA Angels. Just go ahead and break this game down for me on both sides, Adam.
Sandoval is getting some ownership. I think he should. He has pretty decent strikeout stuff. He's not that expensive. We have him right now coming in at actually only about 5% ownership. So he is someone else in that tier. He's obviously cheaper than Paddock, but you can look to him as well. Just probably a bigger gap between him and Paddock than there should be. Not a great pitcher. Does struggle with walks, but also not a bad matchup against the Giants in a good park, even with the fences moved in. So I think Sandoval is a viable option, especially as a pivot from Paddock, or even in addition to Paddock, if you just don't want to go down to Dunning. I think I would be a little bit more interested in Sandoval than Casey Mize, probably, unless we get word that Mize really just isn't going to be limited at all. Not interested in the Giants bats here. On the other side, Cueto, not a very good strikeout pitcher anymore. The Angels do have some really good bats in their lineup. So far this season, Cueto has allowed a 166 expected ISO to righties, only 101 to lefties. Going back to last year, though, a 222 expected ISO to lefties. So typically you want to target him with left-handed power, which basically leaves you with Shohei Ohtani from the Angels. Obviously, if you're rostering Mike Trout and Anthony Rendon, that's not a problem either. So maybe, going to that three-man stack or just one-offing one of those guys. But overall, I think this is one of the least appealing games in kind of all aspects.
I think so as well. As of now, who would you say your top three pitchers and top three stacks would be?
Top three stacks, I think, would be the Dodgers, the Rockies, and the Twins. Top three pitchers, I think, would be Paddock, Dunning, DeGrom, if I can get to him.
Okay.
I mean, and that's factoring in price. Like, obviously, I love Garrett Cole, and I like Lance a lot, too.
Hey, that'll do it for us. Thanks for hanging out with us. As always, we'll be back with you tomorrow. NBA Live before our strategy show, followed by the MLB strategy show. Easy for me to say. I guess we'll do a combined stream again. So, stick around for both of them and then hang out for NBA Live before lock. A lot more coming up throughout the day as well. If you're looking to get your PGA action in, you know where to find it. And so much more. NHL strategy show, MLB Live before lock, and the MLB early bird capping off the night with Emac and Greg Ehrenberg. That'll do it for us. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you back here soon. Actually, Adam and I'll be back here in just about 10 minutes. So NBA coming up next. Peace.